Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 27, Battle to the Death. In the dark, gloomy underground room, that hazy grey fog instantly filled the entire room. If Linley chose to dodge, the only option he had would be to move backwards, in which case, the Grand Warlock would seize the opportunity to flee far away. When deities did battle, everything happened in an instant. HRMPH. Linley's eyes were fierce and determined. Ignoring the grey fog, he charged straight towards the Grand Warlock. Since when have I had enmity with this person? The Grand Warlock, seeing that Linley wasn't dodging and was still charging straight for him, was so frightened that ignoring everything else, he flew straight upwards. Bang! The stone ceiling above them split apart like tofu, and a tunnel was easily dug out. The grey fog completely ignored the protective wind-style divine power covering Linley as well as his draconic scales, directly entering his body and pouring towards his mind. Linley laughed coldly to himself. As I thought, a soul attack. Linley had already made preparations for this duel against the Grand Warlock. Crackle, crackle, the grey fog attempted to attack Linley's soul, but unfortunately, as soon as they touched that translucent, scaly membrane, they instantly dissipated. Only the grey fog which struck against the gap which Linley used his own spiritual energy to patch over was able to last a bit longer. But the amount of grey fog at the gap was simply too small, while Linley had focused a large amount of his spiritual energy to block that part off. This old bastard really is fast. Linley raised his speed to the limit, pursuing after the person through the newly formed tunnel. Actually, upon reaching the deity level, there was no longer much of a distinction between a magus and a warrior. The ultimate goal of both a magus and a warrior was to become a deity. After becoming a deity, both classes would train in the elemental laws. Only, because one was a warrior or a magus in the past, when battle began, one might be more skilled in close combat or distant combat. But in terms of speed, a light-style Grand Magus Saint, such as Desri, upon becoming a deity would most likely be faster than even most warriors who became deities. The Grand Warlock was extremely fast, most likely above average amongst demigods. But Linley's speed was simply astonishing. The only area in which Linley dared to claim superiority over other deities was in speed, and from the underground room of the gorge to the surface, there was a distance of just 1,000 meters. A little bit of distance like this was nothing. Linley quickly caught up to the Grand Warlock. The humming sword song was so clear and distinct. The Grand Warlock forced himself to stay calm, not allowing his soul to be affected. This deity is capable of a sound-based soul attack. When did I ever anger someone like this? The Grand Warlock wondered angrily to himself. Facing this deadly sword attack, the Grand Warlock waved his own black sickle as well. Clang! The Grand Warlock's attack speed was at an inconceivably fast speed as well, and was able to block Linley's attack. After reaching the deity level, the might of a divine power-fueled dimensional decapitator was simply too great. Enormous rips in space had appeared nearby, and the terrifying force of the blow struck onto that black sickle. However, the Grand Warlock clearly had many more tricks and much more experience than Linley. Bang! Relying on the momentum generated by the collision, the Grand Warlock quickly fled across the skies, with a massive explosion following him. The buildings on the ground of the gorge were blasted apart by the colliding blows, while the Grand Warlock himself charged high into the sky. However, the even faster Linley caught up to him in the blink of an eye, blocking off the Grand Warlock in mid-air. It must be understood that this gorge was an important base for the Dawson conglomerate, which was responsible for all sorts of missions of the Dawson conglomerate here in the Barrack Empire. There were over 10,000 people stationed here long-term. Linley and the Grand Warlock's battle caused the ground of the entire valley to shake, and even those buildings began to crumble. Instantly, lamps started to be lit throughout the valley. Angry roars could be heard successively, as the managers of the Dawson conglomerate's base here began to restore order to their people. What is going on? Yale barked furiously as he walked to an empty spot. Right now, most of the people in the valley were walking out of their residences, arriving in the empty grounds. Just then, the earthquake as well as the sudden explosion of that building had startled many people. They now no longer dared to stay in their own homes. Lord Chairman, just then, that building over there exploded for no reason at all. A person was killed by having their head smashed in by flying rocks, while 3 others were wounded. Someone instantly reported to Yale. "There's people above us." Suddenly, excited shouts could be heard. "And they are floating in mid-air." "Saints!" Many people cried out in shock. The people here all raised their heads to stare up into the air above the canyon. Although it was currently night, many people had already lit lamps, and the light of those lamps, as well as the hazy moonlight, allowed them to make out those 2 blurry figures in mid-air. Seeing those 2 figures in mid-air, Yale's face changed. The Grand Warlock and Dragon Blood Warrior. Because of his spiritual connection, Yale could clearly sense that the Grand Warlock was up above him. But as to who the Dragon Blood Warrior was, Yale couldn't be sure, because the draconic scales of the Dragon Blood Warrior up above was glowing with a faint azure gold light. "That's a Dragon Blood Warrior," someone called out in surprise. Everyone below all stared upwards excitedly. Linley stared at the Grand Warlock in front of him. He was secretly shocked. "I didn't expect that this fellow is so amazing, even in close combat." He had launched 3 sword attacks just now, all of which the Grand Warlock had been able to block with that black sickle. If he was poor at close quarters combat, the Grand Warlock would have died long ago in the Gabados planar prison. To survive in a place like that, one couldn't have too any obvious, glaring weaknesses. If one had too great a weakness, there would definitely come a time when someone else would seize that weakness and kill you. "Who are you?" "It seems the 2 of us shouldn't have any enmity against each other." The Grand Warlock stood in mid-air, staring at Linley as he spoke. "Are you perhaps mistaken about something?" The Grand Warlock didn't want to start a pointless fight, especially right now, when he was badly wounded. Staring at the transformed Dragon Blood Warrior in front of him, the Grand Warlock's first thought was of Linley. But in the next instant, he discarded that notion. "It isn't Linley. Linley is only a saint." In addition, Yale told me that after Linley became a Dragon Blood Warrior saint, his draconic scales are deep azure, and not this coloration. The person in front of me is clearly a deity. Can it be that he is one of the elders of the Dragon Blood Warrior clan? The Grand Warlock muttered in his heart. After returning to the Yulon continent, he had learned a few things, and knew that 5,000 years ago, 4 supreme warrior clans had appeared. Can it be that the elders of the Dragon Blood Warrior clan have discovered that I sent Yale to kill Linley? The Grand Warlock couldn't help but guess. "No enmity." A cold, calm voice rang out from Linley's mouth. "If we didn't have enmity, why would I come?" Halfway through his words, Linley transformed into a gust of wind, striking towards the Grand Warlock. The Grand Warlock's black sickle once again transformed into a blur to block. HRMPH The Grand Warlock now was filled with a killing desire as well. Since the opponent wasn't willing to call it quits, then even if he had to risk being injured yet again, he would still kill this person in front of him. The black sickle shook, and the green light in the Grand Warlock's eyes shone dramatically brighter. A low, sinister sound erupted from the Grand Warlock's mouth, and instantly, an enormous black sickle appeared out of nowhere, chopping towards Linley. As for Linley, he slanted his body, moving to dodge it while striking out with the blood-violet sword in his hands in a stabbing blow towards the Grand Warlock. Trillions of sword blurs appeared. Profound truths of the wind, rippling wind. At his current level, when executing the rippling wind technique, every single sword was able to create tears in space. The trillions of swords instantly enveloped the Grand Warlock's entire body. Although the Grand Warlock wielded his sickle very quickly, no matter how quick he was, he couldn't block these trillions of sword shadows. The Grand Warlock's heart was filled with fury. His sickle instantly swung up, transforming into a blur to block the sword shadows stabbing towards his head. At his sword-wielding abilities, this was the best he could do. He simply wasn't capable of blocking all of the sword shadows. The many violet sword shadows chopped the rest of the Grand Warlock's body to mincemeat, which was devoured by the tiny tears in space. The Grand Warlock's head immediately flew far away, and even that black sickle flew away alongside it. "I'm badly injured, but you are about to die." The Grand Warlock knew exactly how powerful that last attack of his had been. Generally speaking, the souls of most demigods, upon encountering that enormous, spiritual energy sickle attack he had just used, would be split in half. The enormous black sickle that had been formed by the Grand Warlock out of nothing but spiritual energy had chopped straight through Linley's skull, chopping against his mind. Clang! The black sickle, upon smashing against that scaled membrane, instantly shattered, more than half of its energy immediately being dispersed. A small amount of remaining energy transformed into black energy, but only a good amount of this wildly striking, unfocused black energy struck against that hole. The patch which Linley's spiritual energy had formed only lasted a short while before being broken through, but by then, only a small amount of black energy was remaining as well. Linley quickly used his remaining spiritual energy to break it all down. What a terrifying soul attack! Linley was astonished. It was very difficult to control spiritual power. Generally speaking, an archmagus of the 9th rank was only capable of expanding and contracting their spiritual power. As for saints, they generally could only move their spiritual energy a little bit. It was very hard to form spiritual energy into an attack. As for this deity in front of him, he had been able to use it to form a black sickle that was essentially solid. This truly was astonishing. He lives up to his reputation as being an expert capable of refining souls. He truly is formidable in the area of souls. Linley felt amazement. If he hadn't had the protection of that damaged, semi-translucent membrane which had absorbed the vast majority of the attack, Linley probably would have been badly injured at the least by that simple attack. Crackle, crackle. The Grand Warlock's body quickly healed, while at the same time, he caught and wore the interspatial ring which had fallen down. A deity's body usually stored a large amount of divine power. The Grand Warlock naturally wouldn't make the mistake of not doing so. His body quickly completely recovered to its normal state. That fellow should be dead by now. The Grand Warlock looked at Linley carefully. He discovered that Linley was looking at him with the barest hint of an upward curve to his lips. Was he smiling? What? The Grand Warlock was astonished. Even in the Gabado's planar prison, he relied on this attack to dominate. This attack had only failed a single time, that was when he encountered the peak demigod, Muba. Afterwards, he had been forced to badly injure his own soul in order to utilize his ultimate attack, which deeply wounded Muba and forced him to flee. I want to see how much divine power you can spend on recovery. Linley sneered. Linley knew very well that gathering more divine power was a very slow process. Being able to quickly repair one's body was the result of using up the divine power that had been already accumulated in the body, but the amount of stored divine power was only enough to be used once or twice. After all, the amount of divine power which the Grand Warlock had to use just now, with nearly his entire body destroyed, had been an astonishing amount. The devilish violet light flashed again, and that pleasant, humming sword song rang out once more. Trillions of sword blurs descended. The Grand Warlock's face was pale. After having experienced so many life-threatening battles in the Gabado's planar prison, he was capable of instantly determining the eventual outcome of this battle. If this was to continue, his divine power would be all used up, and then he would no longer be able to block Linley's attacks, and he would definitely die. Arg! This is the second time. The Grand Warlock felt utterly aggrieved. No longer hesitating, the Grand Warlock made his choice, to use the same technique he had used against Muba. The last time I used this technique, my soul was badly injured. I hope this time, after using the technique, my soul won't directly collapse. The Grand Warlock had no other options. If he didn't do this, he would definitely die. The Grand Warlock's eyes shot out 2 rays of black light, which pierced directly into his black sickle, which began to shake. Instantly, 9 rays of illusory black sickles appeared out of nowhere in midair. Moving in accordance to a strange rhythm, the 9 illusory black sickles actually swirled around and chopped towards Linley, giving him no place to dodge. Soundless and all but undetectable. Not good. Linley wanted to flee, but those 9 illusory black sickles could actually curve, giving him no place to flee. Linley was unable to block those 9 illusory black sickles, which chopped directly towards his mind. Bang! Most of those 9 illusory black sickles slammed against that translucent, scaly membrane and dispersed. But one sickle chopped directly against the gap, and the patch Linley had recreated with his spiritual energy instantly crumbled, and the black sickle chopped directly towards Linley's soul. Spiritual energy flooded in like waves through the opening, charging towards that sword-shaped soul. Clang! The black sickle chopped directly against the sword-shaped soul. Rumble, the sword-shaped soul trembled violently. At this moment, of the 3 azure water droplets hidden within the coiling dragon ring which Linley was wearing, one emitted just a hint of energy, and instantly, the protective azure light on the surface of Linley's sword-shaped soul increased dramatically, in the end destroying that black sickle. Ah! Linley himself, holding his head, collapsed from the sky with a miserable scream. His soul hadn't been destroyed, but the trauma from the massive collision had truly been very severe. Watching Linley fall from the skies, the Grand Warlock revealed a hint of a smile on his face. He's finally dead. But just as Linley's original body fell from mid-air, swoosh! The divine clone, the light green-robed Linley, came flying out from Linley's original body. Blood Violet flew into his hands, and gripping Blood Violet tightly, the divine clone charged directly towards the Grand Warlock, whose soul was already at the point of collapse. Countless sword blurs flashed and lit up. The Grand Warlock raised his black sickle in despair. No dash. The Grand Warlock's body was chopped into mincemeat by trillions of sword blurs, and some blows from Blood Violet even smashed violently against his divine spark, causing the Grand Warlock's soul, which had been fused into the divine spark, to shatter. As for the divine spark itself, it fell straight downwards. The divine clone stretched his hand out and snatched the divine spark, then transformed into a blur, flying directly into the original's body. A look of confusion flashed through Yale's eyes, but then in the next instant, his gaze grew clear again. Staring at Linley, who was already back in human form on the ground, Yale's eyes instantly turned red, and he immediately charged over. 3rd Bro. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 28, The Grand Warlock's Treasure. As the Grand Warlock fell from the skies, it wasn't just Yale who regained his sense of self. The chairman of the other 2 major trading unions of the Yulon continent, the Snow Island Syndicate and the Jir Group, regained their senses of self as well. They all knew what disastrous things they had been doing in the past 6 years. The Grand Warlock is dead. Haha, he finally died. Within a desolate area, 2 silver-robed figures were laughing wildly. How many years has it been? We have finally been freed of that devil's control. The 2 silver-robed men simultaneously ripped away the silver robes from their body, which shattered into countless pieces of cloth. I feel disgusted just looking at these silver robes. The 2 men changed their clothes. They were so excited that their bodies were trembling slightly. Of the 2 silver-robed figures, one was a human, while the other was a panther man. Finally free. Finally free. Their eyes were filled with tears, and they were filled with inexpressible excitement. Over the countless years, under the control of the Grand Warlock, they had done countless things, all of which they now clearly remembered. If the Grand Warlock remained alive, they would have never been able to regain their freedom. Who killed the Grand Warlock? We really should go thank him. The Panther Man was still uncontrollably excited. What, Wigan Wagen? You still want to go thank someone else? The human expert said mockingly. The Panther Man chuckled, then shook his head. Of course not. I've had enough of those long years of being controlled by others. The person who killed the Grand Warlock didn't do it for our sake. Lakaman la ge man, what are your next plans? This is my homeland. The human expert stared at the wilderness, letting out a long sigh. The Yulan continent. It has been 8,000 years since I was last here. 8,000 years. Ever since I encountered the Grand Warlock in the Gabados planar prison and was controlled by him, my power didn't improve at all. I plan to make a good long tour of the continent, and then find a place to studiously train. Wiccan, do you want to go to the necropolis of the gods? The human expert looked at the Panther Man. The necropolis of the gods. The Yulan continent. The Panther Man laughed at himself mockingly. In the past, I followed my master to the Yulan continent and wanted to go to the necropolis of the gods to find treasures. Only, I didn't expect that the Blood Violet Fiend was there as well. Back then, many were killed, while others were imprisoned. I no longer dare to have too much hope towards the Yulan continent. I've already had enough of being subject to the orders of others, to the life of a mindless puppet. I want to find a place to live quietly for a while. The Panther Man said with a self-mocking laugh, given the situation in the current Yulan continent, we Prime Saints are better off being a bit low-key. The human expert nodded as well. And then, the two experts separated, hiding themselves within the Yulan continent. Those who had never been controlled by the soul seeds would find it hard to imagine what that was like. Upon being controlled by a soul seed, one would be loyal to one's master from the deepest parts of one's soul. The master's orders were the number one priority. Under the master's order, they would kill their parents and kill their family and friends without resisting at all. They didn't feel anything when they were controlled. But once they regained their own will, when they remembered what had happened during those long years, they would often go insane. What have I done? Yale's heart was filled with agony. After being controlled by the Grand Warlock, Yale had begun to use cruel, bloodthirsty methods to kill a large number of slaves and collect their souls for the Grand Warlock. During this process, there had been some high-level members of the Dawson conglomerate who had tried to stop Yale. For those who tried to stop him, he suppressed the ones he could suppress, and used bloodthirsty means to kill the ones he could not. Some of them were his relatives in the Dawson clan. These vicious, bloodthirsty actions, along with the fact that those silver-robed men assisted Yale, resulted in Yale gaining absolute, unquestioned power within the Dawson conglomerate. This was a power that was forged through wielding a bloody butcher's blade. Everyone, go back. Yale said to the surrounding people. Lord Chairman, should we arrange some people to take care of this place? A nearby silver-haired old man said. No need, Uncle Albert's aiboci. Yale said sincerely. Alberts was instantly stunned. 6 years ago, Yale had turned cruel and ruthless, and the administrative operations of the Dawson conglomerate had become harsh and rigid. Ever since then, Yale had never again called him Uncle Alberts. Hearing these words, Alberts felt somewhat lost, and he began to think of the affairs of the past. Uncle Alberts. These past 6 years. I'm sorry. Yale said in a low voice. Chairman, young Master Yale. Alberts tried to forcibly suppress the excitement from showing on his face. Yale was back. The Yale of 6 years ago was back. Enough. Everyone, go back and get some rest. Alberts said to the surrounding people in a loud voice. His voice right now was the loudest, most confident he had been in the past 6 years. The people I owe, are far too many. Yale knew how many mistakes he had made in the past 6 years. And third bro. Yale looked towards Linley, who was currently kneeling on the ground in agony. Right now, Linley was in terrible shape. His soul had been concussed massively. It must be understood that generally speaking, when a soul suffered a sufficiently powerful blow, it would collapse. As a deity, Linley's soul was naturally very strong, but still, he currently felt miserable. His entire body felt as though he was rather woozy. Linley forced his eyes to open. He looked at Yale. Seeing the look of concern in Yale's eyes, Linley instantly felt relief in his heart. He had risked his life, and in the end, he had brought the old boss Yale back. Third bro. Yale knelt down in front of Linley, supporting him. Third bro, are you all right? Yale's heart was filled with boundless guilt. Yale, I'm fine. Wait a moment. Linley forced out these words, then sat down in the meditative position. The liquid gold soul essences within the Coiling Dragon ring were currently sending one surge after another of golden fog into Linley's soul world, and as it did, Linley's soul drank it all in as though it was water. Previously, when the 20 million liquid gold soul essences the Grand Warlock had refined had disappeared, they had been seized by Linley using the Coiling Dragon ring. To the Grand Warlock, only after refining the gold liquid to a gold soul pearl would the soul essences become relatively easier to absorb. But Linley, as the owner of the Coiling Dragon ring, could easily absorb large amounts of soul essences. As his sword-shaped soul constantly absorbed them, the glow of that sword-shaped soul continuously grew brighter, as it also slowly increased in size. How comfortable! Linley had a comfortable feeling in his heart. The pain caused by his soul being shaken had long since disappeared. Right now, this sensation of his soul growing was very comfortable to Linley. He didn't need to focus at all on his soul absorbing those soul essences. While chatting with others or focusing on his training, he could continue to absorb soul essences. Only now did Linley open his eyes. Third bro, how do you feel? Yale had been by Linley's side this entire time. His heart was filled with worry. I'm fine. But, boss Yale, you aren't going to give me any more of that terrifying poisoned wine for me to drink, right? Linley said with a smirking grin. Hearing Linley's words, Yale felt relief in his heart. Third bro, thank you. Yale's eyes were filled with a hint of tears. In his heart, Yale understood very well that his attempt to use the soul silk poison to kill Linley was, rationally speaking, not of his own free will. But he still felt guilty. Hearing Linley say those words, he had the feeling that his bro, Linley, didn't care about that matter at all. Thank me for what? Linley said as he stood up, and Yale stood up as well. I'm sorry. I've made a huge mess of your place here. Linley glanced at that nearby, exploded building, then laughed towards Yale. Linley was currently in an excellent mood. On this trip, Linley had come to battle with that deity to the death, and had come prepared to risk his life. Fortunately, he had succeeded. Linley, don't apologize to me. I can't bear it. Yale said solemnly. Yale felt that he owed Linley too much. You can't be blamed. It was a deity who was controlling you. Linley sighed with emotion. The Grand Warlock was a deity. Yale was somewhat shocked. Although he had been controlled by the Grand Warlock, Yale only knew that the Grand Warlock was powerful, and had no way to determine if the Grand Warlock was a deity or not. Right. Otherwise, how could it have been so hard for me to kill him? Linley felt that he was rather lucky as well. If it hadn't been for this damaged soul protecting barrier, and if it hadn't been for... Linley lowered his head to look at the Coiling Dragon ring. In the past, Linley had never truly controlled the Coiling Dragon ring, and had no way to learn what it contained within. But now, Linley knew exactly what it held. Just then, during that dangerous moment, he had clearly sensed one of those 3 azure drops of water emit a ray of energy which allowed the protective azure layer of light around his soul to glow much more brightly. So in the past, when the azure layer of light around my soul suddenly shone dramatically brighter, it was the doing of this mysterious azure water droplet. Linley sighed with emotion. Wait, that's not right. Linley realized something. According to the ancestral records of my Barak clan, that layer of azure light covering the soul is something only possessed by dragon blood warriors. Ordinary saints wouldn't possess it. So why is it that this azure water droplet is capable of causing that layer of azure light to dramatically brighten? In addition, that drop of gold blood, why did it cause my dragon blood warrior form to evolve? Linley glanced at the coiling dragon ring, and at the draconic lines carved onto it. Can it be that the earliest owner of the coiling dragon ring had some sort of relationship with the dragon blood warriors? Linley was forced to come to this sort of hypothesis. After all, there were simply too many coincidences. Linley, what are you thinking about? Yale, seeing Linley suddenly pause, couldn't help but ask. Nothing. Linley didn't think about it any further. Third bro, I have to congratulate you. Yale laughed. Congratulate me for what? Linley laughed. Yale stared at him. Third bro, you killed a deity level expert this time. I expect that you have already reached the deity level, third bro, the deity level. It seems like such a distant, exalted level. Third bro, when we were young and fooled around together, I truly would never have been able to imagine that my friend would become a deity. Deity. Going from being a mortal to becoming a deity was a change in one's level of existence. No matter what race, be it magical beast, beastman, human, metallic life form, plant creature, or any other unique, bizarre races, upon reaching the deity level, they would all have divine bodies and divine sparks. They all had a common term of address, deity. Linley had become a deity. In the Yulan continent, amongst the human society, the highest, most exalted figures were the war god and the high priest. But now, there was another one, Linley. Ha, Linley began to laugh as well. In the past, who possibly could have imagined it? Ah, I almost forgot something important. Linley suddenly turned and stared towards a black patch of ground. It was currently late at night, and nothing could be seen clearly on the ground. Third bro, what are you looking for? Yale was somewhat puzzled. The treasures which the Grand Warlock left behind. Linley had only taken the divine spark just now, but had forgotten to take 2 other important items, the Grand Warlock's divine artifact as well as his interspatial ring. Linley wanted to know what the Grand Warlock held within his interspatial ring. Spreading out his spiritual energy, Linley instantly discovered the location of that black sickle as well as the interspatial ring. In order to utilize the interspatial ring, one first had to bind it with blood. Linley was in no hurry to open it, and so he just directly stored both the black sickle as well as the interspatial ring. Yale, as long as you are fine, I'll be at ease. I think, during the past 6 years, you must have done some foolish things. Of course, none of it is your fault, but your father and the other members of the conglomerate don't know that, right? You need to have a good think about what to do. I won't disturb you. To be honest, I have to get back to Dragonblood Castle right away. Delia and my little brother and the others are all very worried about me. They are worried that I won't be able to come back from this trip. Linley's laughter was so free and unburdened now. Yale felt a surge of gratitude in his heart. He knew that Linley was a saint not too long ago, so he was only an early-stage deity. For the sake of him, Yale, Linley had charged over here without even knowing how powerful the enemy was. This was extremely dangerous, but Linley had done it anyways, even though he, Yale, had tried to use poison to kill him. Yale believed that never in his life would he forget this. Thank you. Yale had nothing else to say. Laughing, Linley clapped Yale on his shoulders. Yale, you will always be the boss Yale of our dormitory 1987. Linley's smile was brilliant. And then, Linley turned and left, because in Dragonblood Castle, there were people worrying about him. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 29. The Disposition of the Divine Sparks. There was a group of people within Dragonblood Castle who were unable to sleep. Linley's departure to do battle with the Grand Warlock was something which Taylor, Gates, and the others hadn't known. Only Wharton and Zisler knew. But after Linley left, Wharton and Zisler informed everyone of this affair. Zisler's thoughts were very clear. If Linley didn't come back, he still had to tell Taylor and the others anyways. If Linley came back successfully, it would be a joyous affair that everyone had to share in. No matter what, it was best to let everyone know. The candles in Dragonblood Castle's main hall were all lit. A large group of people were assembled here. After Zisler and Wharton had informed them that Linley had gone to do battle against a deity, they had been utterly shocked. Right now, all they could do was wait impatiently. Suddenly, footsteps could be heard. "Mother, why have you left your training?" Taylor, who had been worrying about Linley's battle with the deity, turned and saw the person who had just arrived. He couldn't help but call out in surprise. "So you are all here." Delia squeezed out a smile. Originally, Delia was preparing to wait patiently in the pocket dimension, but Delia discovered that she just couldn't calm down. She kept on worrying, and so she decided to just come out and wait for Linley's return in Dragonblood Castle. "So you all know." Delia looked at everyone. Wharton, Nina, Gates, the Barker brothers and their spouses, Taylor, Sasha, Hillman, and housekeeper Hyrie all nodded. Delia nodded slightly as well. All of them were waiting and praying. They raised their heads to stare at the distant night sky, hoping to see that familiar figure appear. "Everyone, don't be impatient. There's a distance of thousands of kilometers from here to the valley. The flying time alone will take a good long while." Wharton urged everyone. "It's father." A cry of delight and joy rang out. It was Sasha, who had been staring at the sky. Instantly, everyone turned to look at the night sky. Indeed, a human figure dressed in a sky blue robe was flying gracefully through the sky. Taylor, Delia, Sasha, and the others all ran forward excitedly. Seeing everyone here, Linley felt a comforting, happy feeling in his heart. Delia, Taylor, Sasha. Linley had a hint of a smile on his face. He was the calmest person here. "Lord Linley, you killed that deity." Gates, coming from behind, shouted out excitedly. Wharton and Zisler all looked at Linley as well. Delia was worried as well. She was worried that Linley might have lost one of his bodies and been forced to flee back. "Of course." Linley grinned. Instantly, smiles blossomed on the faces of everyone present. "Wonderful." Taylor was incredibly excited. "My father is someone who killed a deity. Tonight, nobody is going to sleep. I'll immediately arrange for wine and food to be brought over. Tonight, all of us are going to have a wild party." "Right? Wild party." Gates shouted loudly as well. Everyone was incomparably excited. "Wild party." Linley laughed and nodded as well. Normally so somber and serious, he was very happy right now as well. Before the battle, Linley had felt nervous as well, but now, not only had he returned without being injured at all, he had freed Yale. Linley naturally was incredibly happy. Tonight, Dragonblood Castle was more festive than ever before. They partied until the dawn was beginning to break. Only then did everyone leave, while Delia and Linley asked Zisler to stay behind. Within a guest room in Dragonblood Castle, Zisler stood there, looking at Linley and Delia, wondering why they asked him to remain behind. However, he had an inkling in his heart, because he had long ago hypothesized that this deity-level expert was a practitioner of the edicts of death. When Linley killed the Grand Warlock, he had definitely gained some special items, which others wouldn't even be able to use. Lord Linley. Zisler had a visible smile on his face, only, Zisler's face was simply too eerie and astonishing to begin with. Even smiling, he looked terrifying. Why did you ask me to stay? Linley removed an interspatial ring and tossed it to him. Zisler, this interspatial ring belonged to that deity. It should be much better than yours. Go ahead and bind it by blood. Go ahead and withdraw its contents as well. Linley had great faith in Zisler. Actually, if Zisler intentionally left something inside of it, Linley wouldn't know about it. Yes. Zisler, trembling slightly, accepted the interspatial ring. He didn't care much about the interspatial ring, but of course he was greatly desirous of the possessions of deities. After binding it with blood, Zisler waved his hand, and withdrew a large pile of things from within the interspatial ring, filling up almost half the main hall. Amongst them were many herbs, jars, and the like, as well as some scattered pieces of ore. Seeing these things, Zisler's eyes instantly lit up. A golden pearl of souls. Linley looked at the gold soul pearl held within a translucent glass. He could sense the dense concentration of spirits within it. Through the Coiling Dragon ring, Linley directly drew the gold soul pearl into his Coiling Dragon ring. Actually, Linley had absorbed perhaps just 1% of those liquid gold soul essences. To absorb all of them, it would probably take Linley half a year. But Linley could clearly sense how beneficial it was for his soul to be growing stronger. Lord Linley, many of the materials here are extremely valuable, and very beneficial to me. But these two divine artifacts should be used by warriors. Zisler pointed out two divine artifacts. Linley couldn't help but laugh. So the Grand Warlock didn't just have that black sickle. He had two other divine artifacts as well. Zisler, do you want to become a deity? Linley looked at Zisler, a not quite smile on his face. Behind him, Delia also grinned towards Zisler. Zisler was stunned. Become a deity. Zisler was somewhat numbed. Become a deity? Who wouldn't? Someone as intelligent as him immediately understood from Linley's words what Linley's intentions were. But Zisler still found it rather hard to believe. Zisler knew exactly how important a divine spark was. Even Dylan had felt incredibly grateful towards Linley for gifting him with a divine spark. A divine spark represented the creation of a deity. Can it be that you don't want to? Linley asked. If you don't want to, then forget about it. I want to. Of course I want to. Zisler said hurriedly. Haha, seeing the look on Zisler's face right now, Linley immediately started to laugh. Delia couldn't help but laugh as well. Linley, stop teasing Zisler. Where's that death-style divine spark? Give it to Zisler. This is the divine spark of a deity. Go and fuse it. With a flip of his hand, Linley retrieved the Grand Warlock's divine spark, then tossed it over to Zisler. Seeing the divine spark fly towards him, Zisler felt as though his entire body had turned light and airy, as though he were on a cloud. This was a divine spark. After fusing with it, he would become a deity. Zisler couldn't help but swallow. Trembling, he stretched his hands out and caught the divine spark. Zisler felt as though this divine spark in his hands weighed trillions of pounds, and his hands couldn't help but shake. Lord Linley, thank you, thank you. Zisler was extremely grateful. Before meeting Linley, he had been an Archmagus Necromancer of the 9th rank. Finally, he had become a saint, but Zisler knew very well the limits of his talent. It had taken him 800 years just to reach the saint level. To reach the deity level, the amount of time it would take him would be measured in 10,000 year units. Who would have thought that without having experienced any difficulties, a divine spark would just suddenly appear in front of him like this? Don't say thank you so many times. But Zisler, you have to work hard. Your understanding of the laws is deeper than Barker, but Barker has already begun fusing with his divine spark before you. I want to see who amongst you two will become the third deity of Dragon Blood Castle. Linley said with a laugh. Without question, the second deity of Dragon Blood Castle would be Delia. After all, she was already more than halfway through fusing with her divine spark. Lord Linley, don't worry. I will definitely work hard. Zisler's heart was burning with eagerness. The goal of countless experts, and even countless saints of the Yulan continent, was to become a deity. Next, Linley asked Zisler to leave. Linley, in another few dozen years, our Dragon Blood Castle will have a total of 5 deities. Delia said with a laugh. Linley, Delia, Zisler, Barker, and the fully grown BB. 5. Delia felt amazed as well. But for some reason. Linley frowned. Delia. I still feel a bit uneasy. Right now, the Yulan continent feels like a chaotic pond. No one has any idea anymore what is inside the pond, nor will any of us be able to predict what sort of experts will suddenly appear from within it. Right. Delia nodded slightly. The sudden appearance of the Grand Warlock, as well as that mysterious god, Muba, of that secretive church, and that was just what Linley knew about. Many saints had appeared in the past few years in the Yulan continent as well, which had previously been unknown. Who knew when a full god would emerge? Even though Linley's side had the advantage of numbers, the disparity in raw power would be too great. Linley, how about we go ahead and put this wind-style divine spark to good use as well? Delia said. Desri and the others haven't come looking for you in the past few years. I think they won't come asking for this divine spark again. Right now, Linley still had an unused wind-style divine spark. A divine spark would have to be fused with for dozens of years before a deity would be created. The wind-style divine spark. Linley paused for a moment. No rush. Right now, we aren't lacking for deities. After this last battle, Linley's life returned to its normal tranquility. His divine clone focused on training in the profound truths of velocity. Presently, Linley's profound truths of velocity had only reached a fairly early stage. It was still very far from full mastery. After all, after the profound truths of velocity was fully mastered, that represented the simultaneously mastery and fusion of the fast and slow aspects, which together formed the profound truths of velocity. At that time, Linley would enter the realm of full gods. Given my current speed, who knows how long that would take? 1,000 years? 10,000 years? Linley himself wasn't certain. The more he trained, the more he felt this profound truths of velocity was inconceivably vast and complex. At the same time, Linley's original body focused on training the profound truths of the earth. In Linley's original body, due to having absorbed the soul essences, his soul continuously grew. In just 3 short months, he had absorbed half of those liquid gold soul essences, and his original body's sword-shaped soul had already increased by a sizable amount, while the power of his soul had increased nearly 6-fold. For a soul to increase 6-fold in power, this was truly astonishing. Actually, even the Grand Warlock's soul would have been strengthened multiple times after absorbing those 20 million soul essences. In addition, the Grand Warlock's soul was much more powerful than Linley's to begin with, and so it was only logical that Linley would grow stronger at such a rapid rate. One of the great benefits of his soul growing stronger was the pace at which he gained new insights in the laws and was able to visualize attacks was rapidly rising. After ascending from the saint level to the deity level, Linley's soul had been slightly touched by the natural laws, and so had begun a fundamental transformation, allowing his hypothesizing abilities to increase greatly. Now that his soul was 6 times more powerful than normal, Linley's hypothesizing ability was nearly 100 times faster than in the past when he was a saint. In addition, Linley was constantly draining and refining souls, allowing his hypothesizing abilities to continue to increase. In the past, it might have taken him 8 years for a breakthrough, but now, In just those 3 short months, Linley broke through from the 64 fused waves of the throbbing pulse of the world to the level of 32 fused waves. But upon reaching the level of 32 fused waves, Linley clearly sensed that the difficulty had just increased yet again. Given this level of speed, breaking through to the 16 fused waves level will most likely need another year. Then, how long will it take to break through to the 8 fused waves? Linley was rather astonished. The throbbing pulse of the world rose exponentially in difficulty as one learned more of it. From the 256 waves to the 128 fused waves, and then to the 64 fused waves, the difficulty increase hadn't been too great. But the further one went, the exponentially harder it became. In truth, the throbbing pulse of the world was one of the fairly high-level components of the laws of the earth. It was extremely hard to fully master it at the saint level. Fortunately, Linley's soul had dramatically risen in power, after he had absorbed so many soul essences. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 30, Haru. These quiet, comfortable days passed, one after the other. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. The liquid gold soul essences had been completely absorbed by Linley. Right now, although his sword-shaped soul was just one size larger than before, in terms of quality, it had absolutely transformed. No wonder that deity wanted to collect so many souls and refine them. Linley couldn't help but laugh. But unfortunately, despite the meticulous efforts of the Grand Warlock, in the end, it had all been to someone else's benefit. After completely absorbing the soul essences, Linley left the secret pocket dimension, wanting to take a stroll about Dragonblood Castle. Just as he walked along a flowery path, Linley saw a black blur flash right past the air above him from afar. "Master!" The black shadow flew over to Linley. It was the Black Cloud Panther, Haru. Haru, heading off to the Forest of Darkness again. Linley laughed. Haru nodded his great head. Linley knew that Haru as well those 3 saint-level dragons actually were not accustomed to always living alongside humans. The 4 of them only occasionally stayed in Dragonblood Castle. Most of the time, they flew to the Forest of Darkness, the mountain range of magical beasts, or the mountain range of the setting sun. Those places were their real homes. Linley suddenly had a thought. "Haru, you are darkness style and wind style, right?" Linley asked. "Yes, master." "What of it?" Haru was quite puzzled. Why had Linley suddenly asked this? Linley laughed and said, "Nothing." Linley continued walking forward. Haru stared at Linley's back, puzzled. But Haru didn't think too much of it, and he immediately flew to look for his 3 good friends, those 3 saint-level dragons. Arriving at the training fields in front of Dragonblood Castle, Linley saw Wharton and several others training. Wind style, Haru actually would be a good choice. Linley had been pondering the question of who to give the wind style divine spark to for quite some time now. Gates and the others had almost no affinity for the elemental laws of the wind. Although any saint was capable of fusing with a divine spark, it was best to fuse with a spark of an element one was skilled in. For example, Delia was fusing with a wind-style divine spark, while Barker was fusing in an earth-style divine spark, and Zisler was fusing with a death-style divine spark. And now, Linley had found another candidate, Haru. Haru was a dual-element, darkness and wind affinity magical beast. It indeed would be an excellent choice for him to refine this divine spark. "Big Brother Lay." A familiar voice rang out. Linley looked over. It was Jen. "Jen." Linley revealed a hint of a smile on his face. Jen was wearing water blue magus robes. The passage of time had left no mark on her face at all. Back in the day, Jen was a famous Iron Lady of the Barak Empire's administrative bureaus. Nowadays, Jen was in a Magus Academy working as a Magus instructor. Jen had worked very hard in her Magus training, and she had spent 30+ years refining her abilities. Currently, She was at the level of a magus of the 7th rank. She was more than qualified to be a magus instructor. Haha, Jen, you are back. Ever since you became a magus instructor, you started to spend less and less time here. Warden and the others walked over as well. Actually, everyone in Dragonblood Castle knew how Jen felt towards Linley. Only, they all knew Linley's temperament as well, as did Jen. They rarely spoke, and Jen didn't try to force Linley to spend more time with her. As Jen saw it, her life was already a very blessed one, for her to occasionally be able to see the person she liked, and for her to be able to do something she enjoyed. She enjoyed this sort of leisurely, fulfilling life. There's nothing I can do. There's only 2 breaks each year at the Institute. Jen smiled as she spoke. Warden, where's Arnold? Arnold is playing around in the rear flower gardens, along with the maidservants. Warden laughed. Jen glanced at Linley. Big brother Lay, I'm going to go find Arnold. Linley laughed and nodded. Jen doted on Arnold very much. Everyone in Dragonblood Castle knew this. Within the pocket dimension, the multicolored energy streams swirled in the chaotic space outside the membrane. Dimensional cracks could be seen everywhere. Linley and Delia, husband and wife, were quietly training here. Linley's divine clone and his original body were separately training in the profound truths of velocity and the profound truths of the earth. Whew! Linley stopped training. Delia. Linley called out. What is it? Delia opened her eyes, looking at Linley in confusion. Is something wrong? Delia, right now, we still have one more divine spark left. I'm preparing to give this divine spark to Haru and have him fuse it. What do you think? Linley wanted to ask Delia for her opinion first. Delia's eyes lit up. Haru? If it is Haru, that actually is an excellent choice. He is your magical beast, and all these years, him and those 3 saint-level dragons have handled many tasks on behalf of the Empire during those battles. Delia appreciated Haru very much. Haru was very low-key in Dragonblood Castle, but whenever any problems arose, Haru would carry out the tasks which others didn't want to carry out without a single word of complaint. Then it is settled. Linley made up his mind. After becoming a deity, Linley was no longer under much pressure. Generally speaking, he would let his divine clone fully focus on training, while his original body would occasionally go wandering about Dragonblood Castle. After all, there was more to life than just training. Within the main hall of Dragonblood Castle, dozens of people were seated around that 10-meter-long table. They were eating together, and Linley was seated in the main seat. Rumble. A unique energy ripple came from the south. The other people in the main hall didn't notice anything, but Linley raised his head, staring towards the south in amazement. Yet another person has become a deity. Linley, who had once sensed the energy signature of the natural laws, was very familiar with that energy wave. Although that energy wave had traveled a great distance and was now very weak, Linley could still sense it very clearly. That was a unique energy wave generated by the descent of the natural laws when a person became a deity. Someone to the south became a deity. Who? Linley secretly wondered. To be precise, right now, both Tulili and Desri were located to the south of Linley. Aside from those 2 familiar figures, there were also the various prime saints who had appeared out of nowhere in recent years, such as those 2 in the Rohalt Empire. All of them had the capability of reaching the deity level. So who was it? You keep eating. I need to make a trip. Linley rose to his feet. Warden, Gates, and the others stared at Linley in confusion, but they didn't ask him about it. Linley walked out of the main hall. Then immediately flew into the air. In mid-air, Linley could now clearly sense the area the energy ripples were coming from. Directly from the south. It shouldn't be Tulili. No longer wondering, Linley immediately spread out his spiritual energy. Upon reaching the deity level, Spiritual energy could also be described as divine sense. Linley's divine sense instantly spread out. If he hadn't absorbed those 20 million soul essences, Linley's divine sense would only be able to cover roughly 1,000 kilometers or so. But now, Linley's divine sense was able to cover 10,000 kilometers. But of course, this was only in the Yulon continent's plane. If he were in some other, higher planes, the area his divine sense covered would be much smaller. His divine sense spread out like a ripple in water, quickly reaching the mountain where Desri resided. Right here. Linley could clearly sense the powerful natural laws rippling forth from this location. Linley no longer dared to continue spreading his divine sense. All he did was wait. After all, the process of being given a divine spark and forming a divine body was a very short one. Indeed. Just a short while later, the ripples of those natural laws disappeared. Linley once again spread out his divine sense, instantly covering that person who had just become a deity. It is Desri. Linley revealed a hint of a smile on his face. At the moment, Desri was currently within an underground training room in his mountain residence. There were quite a number of people gathered there, including Penslin, Higginson, Reynolds, and others. These people were all excitedly watching as Desri became a deity. Desri had also chosen the second method, dividing his soul in two. Desri, congratulations. Linley's voice transmitted directly into Desri's mind. Haha, Linley, I was half a year slower than you. Desri spoke modestly, but in his heart, he was overjoyed. He had stopped at the prime saint level for too long a period of time. Today, he had finally broken through, and it was through relying on his own ability. The two deities were separated by thousands of kilometers, but they spoke to each other spiritually. Desri, why did you choose to separate your soul? Linley asked, puzzled. Don't you only train in the laws of light? Linley, although the soul-splitting process is extremely harmful to the soul, with time, the soul will grow and heal. But now, I have two separate bodies. At least, when I'm fighting, if one of my bodies is destroyed, I'll still have another body. It basically means I'll have a second life. And more importantly, although I'm currently only training in the laws of light, does that mean in the future, I won't be able to train in anything else? Linley laughed as well. Actually, the majority of people who became deities on their own, if they knew the difference between the two choices, would choose the second option. The damage to the soul caused by the soul splitting was only temporary, after all. But what it represented was an additional life, as well future possibilities for further training. After all, after one became a deity, one would have an unlimited lifespan. One could train in the other elemental laws. For example, if Linley had enough time, he could definitely continue to train in the fire style, or even the way of destruction. Desri, you just became a deity. I imagine you have quite a few things to attend to. I won't bother you anymore. Afterwards, when you have some free time, come for a stroll at my place. Linley laughed. Definitely. Desri agreed. Desri, too, sensed that the variables and changes in the Yulon continent had become highly unpredictable. Joining forces with Linley would be beneficial to both of them in their ability to protect themselves. After all, generally speaking, a person who became a deity on his or her own was more powerful by a good margin than someone who had become a deity through fusing with a divine spark. Fusing with a divine spark was like simply reading a book to understand the laws contained within it, while becoming a deity independently was like actually writing a book. The author of a book would naturally have a greater understanding of it than the readers. He would fully understand every part of the book, and would be able to apply the principles within more easily as well. Linley withdrew his divine sense. Linley stood there in mid-air, directly summoning his magical beast. Haru, come over, quickly. At this moment, Haru was still in the forest of darkness, but upon hearing Linley's order, He immediately flew over in haste. Only, Haru was still a few thousand kilometers away from Dragon Blood Castle. Linley waited in the rear flower garden for Haru's arrival. Swoosh! Haru landed on the ground. Master! Haru looked at Linley in confusion. Linley had never so urgently summoned him before. After all, his power in Dragon Blood Castle was below average. There were only a few who were weaker than him. Haru, want to become a deity? Linley revealed a hint of a smile on his face. Haru's eyes suddenly turned around, and all the fur on his body stood up. He stared at Linley in astonishment. Master. Did you just say? Haru, having lived in Dragon Blood Castle, knew that Barker and Zisler had both acquired divine sparks. Could it be that the same good fortune was about to descend upon him, Haru? Haru felt somewhat numb. He himself felt that within Dragon Blood Castle, he was an unimportant, unnoticeable figure. Right. Divine spark. Linley's smile was very bright. With a flip of his hand, Linley retrieved a black divine spark, radiating a faint green light. Haru stared at the divine spark, forgetting to breathe. All of his attention had been completely captured by that divine spark. The world of magical beasts was one where the strong were venerated. The friends which Haru had made were mostly saint-level magical beasts as well. The mountain range of magical beasts, the mountain range of the setting sun, the forest of darkness. Perhaps Haru hadn't met 100 saint-level magical beasts yet, but he had definitely met more than 50. These saint-level magical beasts worshipped Lord Beirut and Lord Dalin, because Lord Beirut and Lord Dalin were both magical beasts who had trained to the point of being able to take human form. Magical beasts who had become deities. All of these saint-level magical beasts longed for the day when they, too, would become deities. Deity-level magical beasts, standing atop all the other magical beasts of the world. I, Haru, am going to become a deity. Haru felt his head grow numb. Haru had always been quite satisfied. After all, Black Cloud Panthers were generally of the 9th rank. He was already quite satisfied at having become a saint. And was very grateful towards Linley for having given him a saint-level Magi Sidecore and allowing him to break through to the saint level. Thus, Haru did whatever Linley asked him to do without a word of complaint. What, you don't want to? Linley snickered. I want to. Haru responded very quickly this time. Laughing, Linley tossed over the divine spark. Glimmering under the reflected rays of the sun, the divine spark flew towards him. Haru stared at the divine spark, his mind filled with thoughts. How could he have imagined that a magical beast of the 9th rank like himself would not only become a saint, but also, it seemed he was about to become a deity-level magical beast whom other saint-level magical beasts worshipped. I, Haru, am also about to become Lord Haru. Haru was currently imagining the look of awe and veneration in the eyes of countless magical beasts as they referred to him as Lord Haru. How about, in the future, I'll choose the mountain range of setting sun. I'll become the king of the mountain range of setting sun. I, Haru, king of the mountain range of the setting Sunday. Haru had never been so happy before. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 31, The Deity-Level Expert, Muba. The Barak Empire's southwest area. Within the valley amongst a chain of mountains. This was an important base for the Dawson conglomerate. In the past, there had been many people stationed here, but ever since Linley had killed the Grand Warlock, Yale naturally had stopped the practice of shipping slaves to this location, and thus the number of people stationed here was lowered as well. These days, there were only a few thousand people present, mostly responsible for trading activities. Night had descended. The Dawson conglomerate employees who worked here now had much easier lives. At night, many men would get together to drink deep into the night, with them only wobbling home in small groups of 2 and 3. During the past year, life has gotten so much better. A muscular young man, reeking of wine, said loudly. A few years ago, in this valley of Mt Swallow, each day was like hell. Damn. Right. Back then, I didn't even dare to go out at night. Too many people died. I don't even know how many corpses I had to dispose of. A middle-aged man with curly golden hair, thinking back to the affairs of the past, couldn't help but sigh with amazement. Those days, over 10,000 corpses had to be shipped away on a daily basis. The employees who lived and worked at this branch of the Dawson conglomerate within the valley always felt as though they were at the psychological breaking point. The three men, walking shoulder to shoulder, suddenly realized to their astonishment that they could no longer move. The space around them seemed to have solidified, causing them to be unable to move at all. They were so frightened that they wanted to open their mouths, but they could not. The three of them all stared with round eyes, terrified. From within the darkness a human figure wrapped in a black robe appeared before them. Seeing this mysterious black-robed man, all three felt their hearts shake. They somewhat understood that the reason they couldn't move and couldn't even open their mouths was the result of the actions of this mysterious man in black. How long ago did this canyon cease trading in slaves? The black-robed man's low, gravelly voice rang out. Speak, but don't shout too loudly. Nobody will be able to hear you. In addition, if someone shouts loudly and irritates me, I'll kill him. He swept the three men with his dark, cold gaze. The three men's forehead and back were utterly drenched with sweat. To their astonishment, they found that their mouths could move again. Speak. The mysterious black-robed man said. Half a year ago. That golden-haired, middle-aged man was somewhat more mentally disciplined. The other two were scared speechless. Half a year ago. Half a year ago, did something happen? Such as a battle? The black-robed man asked. Yes, there was a major battle. The muscular youth came to his senses as well. He hurriedly said, half a year ago, late at night, two saints battled, causing the ground of our entire valley to shake, and even many buildings were damaged. The ground shook. The mysterious black-robed man seemed to have thought of something. Continue. Describe what happened that night in detail to me. The youngster with inch-long short hair added, we were all present. At first, we didn't notice the battle, only that the ground was shaking, followed by buildings exploding. We were so frightened that we ran outside, at which point we discovered that in the air above the valley, two experts were battling. One was a dragon blood warrior, while the other was a black-robed person. Oh, right. He wielded a black sickle. That sickle was so enormous, at least 10 meters long. Right. It was very long, and then we saw it transform into 9 of those black sickles. The muscular youngster added. They didn't know that those sickles were created from the Grand Warlock's spiritual energy, because at that time, it was dark. Although there were torches on the ground, they were only just barely able to make out the scene. They did, however, clearly see the enormous black sickle formed from spiritual energy. Sickle. The mysterious black-robed man was silent for a while. And the results? The mysterious black man continued. The battle happened too fast. We only saw that the black-robed man was turned into a pile of mincemeat, and then the dragon blood warrior fell to the ground. It was the dragon blood warrior who won. Our Lord Chairman then ordered us to go back to our homes, and then the Lord Chairman stayed with the dragon blood warrior for a very long time. The muscular youth stuttered. The mysterious black-robed man immediately asked, that dragon blood warrior, was his name Linley? Right. It should have been Lord Linley. Lord Linley is on very good terms with our Lord Chairman. The golden-haired, middle-aged man said. Very good. The mysterious black-robed man nodded in satisfaction. I am very satisfied with your answers. The three men let out secret sighs of relief. Crackle, a very soft sound. The bodies of the three men instantly crumbled into three piles of dust. He really did die. The mysterious black-robed man was extremely angry. He actually died, and before he finished refining the gold soul pearl he promised me. The black-robed man was Beaumont, whom the Grand Warlock had promised to help fuse a gold soul pearl for Linley. Beaumont's eyes were cold. I didn't expect that in such a short time period, he was able to become a deity, and that he even managed to survive in the face of the Grand Warlock's ultimate attack. Beaumont knew very well that the Grand Warlock's ultimate attack was a self-damaging attack that would devastate the opponent. For an expert who had just reached the deity level to be able to withstand it caused Beaumont to feel shocked. Indeed, he lives up to his reputation as being an ultimate genius of the Yulan continent. Beaumont's heart was actually filled with hatred. The gold soul pearl was very important to him. The benefits of absorbing one were simply too great. Not only would one's soul be strengthened, one's future rate of improvement in training would also be sped up dramatically. HRMPH Linley. Beaumont muttered Linley's name, then with a cold laugh, disappeared into a black ray of light, disappearing into the horizon. Yulan calendar, year 10,040. December 29th. The previous night, there had been a great blizzard. By daybreak, the snowfall stopped, and the entire Dragon Blood Castle was now transformed into a world of snow. Under the light of the sun, the accumulated snow was as brilliant as a gemstone. Even Delia temporarily paused her training. After all, the Yulan festival was about to arrive. Everyone would get together over the next few days. Outside Dragon Blood Castle, a middle-aged man with a head of neat, short silver hair, wearing a thick white robe, walked through the snow to stand in front of Dragon Blood Castle. This middle-aged man's face had a hint of a smile on it, but his eyes looked like black jade. "Stop, citizen!" The Dragon Blood Castle's guards instantly called out. The middle-aged man glanced at the guards with a smile. "Go make a report that I have come to meet with the master of Dragon Blood Castle, Linley." The faces of the two guards outside Dragon Blood Castle changed. In the Barrack Empire, the name Linley was inviolable, like the name of a god. Even if someone were to refer to him by name, they would still respectfully refer to him as Lord Linley. There were very few people who dared to refer to Linley by his name directly. The two guards were just about to shout in rebuke, but suddenly, "Let him in!" Linley's voice rang out in the minds of these two guards. The two guards were both shocked. Linley had actually mentally spoken to them for the sake of this person. "Please, come in." Although puzzled, the two guards still allowed this person to enter. Within the rear flower garden, Linley and Delia were currently seated together, enjoy the snowy scene and the sunlight. "Delia, soon, an important guest is going to be coming." Linley smiled as he looked at Delia. Delia was somewhat surprised. "An important guest? Who? How do you know?" "That guest directly used his divine sense to contact me." Linley shook his head with a laugh. "Are you saying he is a deity?" Hearing the words divine sense, Delia instantly understood. She seemed very shocked. "Linley, which deity? The war god and the others are still in the necropolis of the gods, right? They won't be back for 3 more years. You'll know soon enough." At present, Linley was in a fine mood. I didn't expect that he would so politely ask the guards outside to send a message. How amusing. Generally speaking, the likes of Desri and Tulili would fly directly into Dragon Blood Castle. If a deity wanted to meet with Linley, they could simply fly directly in. There was no need to insist on the gate guards to make a report. Soon afterwards, the deity walked into the rear flower garden. "Mr. Linley, greetings," the silver-haired middle-aged man said with a smile. "My name is Muba." "Mr. Muba, I've heard of your name long ago." Linley spoke. The god of that mysterious religion was named Muba. Earlier, When he had just arrived at the gate to Dragonblood Castle, Muba had directly greeted Linley with his divine sense. Although Linley was surprised, he still warmly welcomed the man. After all, this person had come in an extremely polite manner. Hearing Linley say this, Muba understood that this founding of a religion was probably already known to Linley. He began to laugh as well. "I truly am sorry. Without getting your permission, Mr. Linley, I started to proselytize in your empire." Towards this, Linley didn't openly express if he was upset or not. "Mr. Muba, please sit." Linley pointed at a nearby stone bench. Laughing merrily, Muba sat down. Muba's face was perpetually sunny and smiling. Even his gaze made a person think of the nourishing spring wind. This sort of person really was the sort which few would think of as an enemy. "Might I ask what the purpose of this visit is, Mr. Muba?" Linley was the first to speak. Muba laughed. "Actually, the first reason I came is to apologize. Before this, I knew that you, Mr. Linley, were a saint. As I saw it, you shouldn't care too much about faith energy. At that time, when I erected my religion, it actually didn't affect you very much, Mr. Linley. But now that you have become a deity, Mr. Linley, I feel rather embarrassed." Linley and Delia were both very surprised. He had come to apologize, just for that. Could it be that a deity was so courteous and pleasant? "Mr. Muba, since you explain it so courteously, of course I won't be upset about it," Linley said with a calm laugh. Muba quickly continued, "Mr. Linley, don't worry. In a short period of time, I will resolve this issue of proselytizing. At least, within your Barak Empire, you won't find my religion again." Muba's attitude was very sincere. Linley actually didn't know what to say. "Mr. Linley, I imagine that as you have only just reached the deity level, there are a few things you don't know yet. I'll tell you a few common facts as a form of apology," Muba said sincerely. Given how he was acting, Linley found it hard to hold a grudge against this Muba. Only, in his heart, Linley still felt puzzled. This Muba was perhaps being a bit too courteous. Linley had just reached the deity level. There was no need for Muba to act in such a way. "It is true that I have just reached the deity level. I'd gladly welcome some advice from you, Mr. Muba," Linley said. Muba nodded slightly. "Upon reaching the deity level, we can all be considered gods, now. To us, both our divine spark and our soul are very important. The divine spark is unbreakably strong, but the soul is very weak. I imagine that you, Linley, have also sensed the benefits of faith energy by now." Linley nodded slightly. As soon as he had become a deity, Linley had absorbed just a bit of faith energy. At that time, Linley didn't sense much, but after the past half year, Linley could clearly sense that the faith energy was slowly fusing with his own spiritual energy, while at the same time forming a protective layer around his soul. But of course, to Linley, it seemed that this protective layer was extremely weak. Faith energy is exceedingly beneficial to the soul's growth. At the same time, it will also protect the soul. When faith energy reaches an extremely powerful level, faith energy's protection alone will be capable of blocking many soul attacks. Muba sighed. Linley nodded slightly. After all, he had only absorbed half a year's worth of faith energy. The likes of the war god, who had absorbed 5,000 years of faith energy, would have a far denser, deeper reservoir of faith energy than himself. The likes of sovereigns, who absorbed faith energy from countless planes, had been doing so for trillions of years. The amount of faith energy they had was surely at an astonishing level. Faith energy is extremely beneficial to us. You understand this as well. Next, I'll explain some important common facts regarding divine artifacts. This will be extremely important to your future training. Muba didn't try to conceal anything at all. This common knowledge, however, for many experts who had just become deities, was knowledge they would only gain after having suffered quite a few mishaps. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 32, Divine Artifacts and Divinities. Hearing these words, Linley couldn't help but frown. Important common facts about divine artifacts? Important to his future training? Divine artifacts are just a type of weapon. How could they impact training? Linley was puzzled, but he didn't say anything. He just quietly listened to Mueba's explanation. Actually, Linley wouldn't fully believe Mueba's words. Mueba's arrival today was simply too strange. According to what Linley knew, in the 4 higher planes and the other major planes, experts engaged in battles against each other. How could they be so courteous? But since Mueba was acting in such a way, Linley naturally would receive him with equal courtesy. He carefully listened to Mueba's explanation. I trust that you, Mr. Linley, also know that divine artifacts are divided into low, middle, and high-quality artifacts. Different divine artifacts have different levels of power. Mueba looked at Linley. Linley laughed. Although I don't know too much, I have heard of divine artifacts being divided into several levels, and that they have differences in power. What of it? What are you trying to say by discussing this, Mr. Mueba? Mueba laughed. Let's not discuss the differences in power between divine artifacts just yet. First, let me ask you, Mr. Linley. Do you know how divine artifacts are created? I do not. Linley replied succinctly. Linley found it harder and harder to understand the meaning of Mueba's words. Linley, I am about to tell you, that actually, all divine artifacts, be they high or low level, are exactly the same when first created. Mueba said with a calm laugh. He paid attention to Linley's face, and indeed, it was as he had suspected. Linley was very surprised. How can they be the same? Linley was extremely puzzled. In the Yulan continent, ordinary ores and valuable ores would naturally produce weapons of varied quality. But divine artifacts? The materials which divine artifacts are made from might have some differences, but generally speaking the differences aren't major. Mueba explained in detail. The level of a divine artifact isn't determined by its birth, it is determined by the experiences it has after being created. Experiences. Linley didn't really understand. The nearby Delia maintained her silence. She was also listening carefully. Right. For example, an ordinary divine artifact that was just created. It is very ordinary, very average. But if it is in the hands of a high god, one which treats this weapon like family and often uses his divine power and spiritual energy to nourish the divine artifact, as well as often uses it to battle, hundreds of millions of years later, that divine artifact will most likely have killed over 1 million deities. By then, you would discover that this divine artifact has actually transformed into a high-level divine artifact. Mueba smiled as he looked at Linley. Hearing this, Linley seemed to understand a bit. What do you think? Mueba laughed. Linley felt as though he now dimly understood the meaning of Mueba's earlier words. The level of a divine artifact isn't determined by its birth, it is determined by the experiences it has after being created. How much of a difference can there be between divine artifacts in terms of what mineral ores were used to create them? But the baleful aura and spirit of a divine artifact is determined by its experiences, and are formed slowly. Those things cannot possibly be granted by lifeless minerals. Mueba continued. Linley was beginning to understand. Baleful aura. Spirit. Linley rather agreed with Mueba's explanation. People like us, after stepping onto the path of training, should understand how hard and arduous this road is. When we become deities, it can be considered that we have succeeded to a certain extent already. Mueba said with a sigh. Only, in the 7 divine planes and the 4 higher planes, there are far too many demigods like us. Divine artifacts are what we rely on to protect ourselves and kill enemies. Mueba said solemnly. Linley once again agreed with Mueba's explanation. The soul was the fundamental part of a deity. What deities in turn truly relied on was their insights in the laws, as well as a suitable set of divine artifacts. Relying on divine artifacts and insights into the laws, one could protect oneself and deal with enemies. To truly become attuned to the spiritual nature of a divine artifact isn't an easy task. Mueba continued. Can it be, Linley, that you think that just by binding it with blood, you will be able to fully make the divine artifact yours? Linley looked at Mueba in confusion. Binding something by blood to become its master, this was common knowledge. Binding by blood is nothing more than showing that this divine artifact belongs to you. However, to truly make it one with your will isn't that simple. You must understand, a divine artifact, especially one which has existed for countless years, has a spirit of its own. Mueba said solemnly, as an expert grows, his divine artifact will grow alongside him and his experiences. We must treat our divine artifacts as we would our family. We must make our spirits become as one over a long period of time. Divine artifacts that have killed many deities will have extremely powerful spiritual natures, making it easier to use them once you are one with it. For example, an expert who trains in the way of destruction might use an ordinary divine artifact, but after using it for 10 million years and killing many deities, this divine artifact will become a divine artifact with a destruction-style nature. For example, just by filling it with divine power, the divine artifact's vibrations alone can cause space to shatter and create spatial blades. Linley's heart trembled. Blood Violet. Blood Violet was exactly like this. Linley only had to fill it with divine power, and Blood Violet would not only create spatial fractures, it would also generate a humming sword song that could cause vibrations in the souls of others. Linley had been wondering this entire time about this. A divine artifact was nothing more than something formed from minerals. How, then, could it have such an unusual effect? Now, it seemed, it was because of its spiritual nature. Compared to Blood Violet, the adamantine heavy sword was much inferior. Linley was already beginning to believe Mueba's explanations. Let me make an example. A newly forged divine artifact is like an infant. What will the infant be like when it grows up? That depends on its future experiences. What we need to do is to cultivate it. Mueba explained. Linley, if you have a powerful divine artifact, then what you need to do is make it acknowledge you. Linley began to worry. What does Mueba mean by saying this? Could it be that he knows that I have powerful divine artifacts? Linley was still very suspicious regarding this visit by Mueba. Hearing Mueba's words, he became even more cautious. Mr. Mueba, you said acknowledge. Linley looked at Mueba. Mueba nodded slightly. Powerful divine artifacts are exceedingly rare and valuable. This is because generally speaking, a deity is only capable of protecting and cherishing one or two divine artifacts, valuing them like his own life. It's virtually impossible to make them give it up to someone else. Just now, I said that newly made divine artifacts are like infants, while those very powerful divine artifacts are like adults. Powerful divine artifacts possess their own spirits, and are naturally powerful. But since they are already adults, it will be very hard for them to truly acknowledge another master. Only after it has truly acknowledged you will you be able to utilize its full power. Linley listened intently to these words. His adamantine heavy sword was most likely an infant right now. He needed to spend time to nourish it and help it grow. As for Blood Violet, it was already an adult with a soul of its own. It wouldn't so easily acknowledge him. Most likely, the person which Blood Violet truly acknowledged was that one, the devilish, purple-haired man who had nurtured it from an ordinary divine artifact to its current level of power. Mueba was finished with his explanations. But his words had a major impact on Linley. After all, one of the most important things to a person training on this path was his weapons. Acknowledge. Acknowledge how? Linley asked. Hard to say. Muaba frowned. I can tell you a simple method. That method is, normally, often use your spiritual energy and divine power to nourish it. This is the most ordinary and most common way. Actually, to make a divine artifact that has a spirit acknowledge you as its master will require you to pay a high price. A divine artifact will be able to sense the love you bear it as well. Muaba laughed. To put it simply, don't treat it as a lifeless weapon. Treat it as you would a living creature. As time goes on, I imagine that the divine artifact will eventually acknowledge you. Linley nodded slightly. Treat divine artifacts like living creatures. What if you are the first master of a divine artifact? Linley asked. That's simple. Just keep nurturing and cultivating it. It will naturally and completely acknowledge you. Muaba said with a laugh. Linley suddenly had a thought. His adamantine heavy sword didn't have to be bound with blood at all. That meant, it hadn't reached that level yet. If a weapon's quality makes it very close to a divine artifact in power, but isn't at the level of needing to be bound by blood, what then? After reaching the deity level, can one continue to use this weapon? Linley asked. He actually truly did have some affection towards his adamantine heavy sword. He didn't want to give up the adamantine heavy sword. And, in terms of quality, it wasn't too far off either. Haha. Muaba began to laugh loudly. Linley, binding by blood doesn't necessarily determine whether a weapon is good or not. For example, interspatial rings. In the higher planes, interspatial rings are as common as bags or sacks here in the Yulan continent. They are very ordinary. Interspatial rings need to be bound by blood, but does that mean they are powerful? Linley was stunned. All these years, Linley had always believed that binding by blood was something which a weapon would only acquire after reaching the divine artifact stage. But now, from the sound of it, that was a mistake. Binding by blood is nothing more than a technique. Muaba laughed. For example, an ordinary blade, even just a wood-cutting machete, in the hands of a sovereign who often uses his sovereign power and his spiritual energy to nourish it, after trillions of years, will most likely have transformed into a sovereign artifact which is beyond the level of divine artifacts. Muaba explained. Linley's eyes lit up. Sovereign artifacts. This was the first time Linley had heard him mention sovereign artifacts. Right. Sovereign artifacts. Muaba laughed. I forgot to tell you. The various levels which divine artifacts can be divided into also are based on the power of the divine artifact's master. Some newly forged divine artifacts, if given to a demigod to use and nurture who remains at the demigod level, most likely will only be a low-level divine artifact. But a full god who nurtures it, as long as he spends time and effort on it, will allow it to become a middle-level divine artifact. From this, we can tell, that if a sovereign wholeheartedly devotes himself to nurturing a weapon, then the weapon will most likely reach the sovereign artifact level. As for what the weapon started off as, that really doesn't matter much. Linley nodded slightly. Muaba could tell that this Linley most likely had a mortal, ordinary weapon. Hearing Muaba's explanation, Linley felt at ease. He didn't need to change weapons, at least. Linley had been worried that if in the future, he grew too strong, if the adamantine heavy sword would perhaps be unsuited to high-level combat. But now, it seemed, there was no need, as Muaba had put it, even an ordinary wood-chopping machete, in the hands of a sovereign, could become a sovereign artifact with enough time and attention from the sovereign. My adamantine heavy sword is much better than a wood-chopping machete at least. Linley was in an excellent mood after hearing this. Mr. Linley, I won't disturb you further. I'll head back for now. Muaba laughed as he stood up. Linley and Delia hurriedly stood up as well. No matter what Muaba's intentions were, he had told Linley many things today. Linley felt very grateful towards him. In addition, Linley felt that what Muaba had said was most likely real, based on Linley's own experiences with Blood Violet. After Muba left. So the creation of a powerful divine artifact is so complicated. Delia sighed. Linley laughed. Actually, that makes sense. Only if you wholeheartedly nurture it will a truly powerful divine artifact slowly be created. If just by relying on good materials and good forging skills, you could create a powerful divine artifact, then they would be all over the place. Linley had already made up his mind. In the future, he would have to pay more attention to his adamantine heavy sword and Blood Violet. While he traveled on his path to the peak of training, his divine artifacts would grow alongside him. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 33, A Wave of Refugees. Deep within Dragon Blood Castle. Within the pocket dimension. Linley was seated on the ground in the meditative posture, his adamantine heavy sword resting across his legs. Linley was currently using his spiritual energy to encompass and nourish it. He didn't dare to use his divine power yet. According to Linley's plan, when he later had a divine earth clone, he would have his divine earth clone wield this weapon. Thus, he had to use earth-style divine power to nourish it, but right now, the only type of divine power in Linley's body was wind type. Dong. Dong. The unique throbbing pulse of the world thudded in Linley's mind. After becoming a deity and absorbing 20 million soul essences, at present, Linley's soul was already extremely powerful, and he could clearly sense the throbbing pulse of the world. Within Linley's mind, a visualization even came to mind, the heart of the world, which possessed a unique tempo. With each beating tempo, a water-like ripple spread forth. From the 64 fused waves to the 32 fused waves, Linley had only needed 3 months. But from the 32 fused waves to the 16 fused waves, Linley had to spend 1 year and 3 months. And this was after Linley's soul had changed, with his hypothesizing and visualizing abilities increased 100-fold. If I were at the prime saint level, most likely I would have had to spend over 100 years before being able to transform the 32 fused waves to the 16 fused waves level. Linley broke through to the 16 fused waves, but he didn't pause at all, continuing to train. From the 16 fused waves to the 8 fused waves, all he had to do was fuse them in 8 pairs of 2. The number of fusions wasn't very high, but every single fusion was so complicated that Linley felt extreme difficulty. Within Linley's mind, 16 illusory adamantine heavy swords were constantly demonstrating various moves at various speeds. In every second, they transformed tens of thousands of times. This non-stop visualization resulted in occasional improvements, while at the same time he continued to attune with the sensations of the throbbing pulse of the world itself and the correct direction towards which he should try. Complicated, vast. Only when I fuse it to the single wave will I have truly mastered the throbbing pulse of the world. The more he trained bitterly, the more Linley sighed to himself. But with each level, the difficulty of fusing the waves yet again increases tenfold. From the 16 fused waves to the 8 fused waves, it will most likely take several years. Linley didn't care too much about several years. But Linley had the feeling that from the 8 fused waves to the 4 fused waves, it would take even longer. And then he would have to fuse them into the 2 fused waves, before the final destination of the throbbing pulse of the world, the single, true wave of the earth. That last step was a barrier. For the likes of Desri, that barrier had halted them for thousands of years. For them to all become one. I don't know how long it will be before I'll be able to completely comprehend the true throbbing pulse of the world. Linley was filled with anticipation towards the profound truths within the throbbing pulse of the world. He had the feeling that once this profound truth was mastered, its power would definitely be exceptional. Since his conversation with Muba, Linley had trained for another 3 years. Within those 3 years, with regards to the profound truths of the earth, Linley was still stuck at the 16 fused waves level of the throbbing pulse of the world. He worked hard to break through to the 8 fused waves level. As for the profound truths of velocity, although he had some improvements, compared to the vastness of the profound truths of velocity, his improvements didn't count for much. What the war god had originally said was very true. If one's understanding of the elemental laws were measured in percentages, then only after one mastered 10% of an elemental law would one become a full god. Right now, my understanding of the profound truths of velocity is perhaps only a tenth of just the profound truths of velocity, to say nothing of the elemental laws of the wind. Linley was in no rush. He had trained for just dozens of years. He knew that he should be satisfied with the amount of accomplishments he already had. There were some poor people who had been stuck at the prime saint level for 10 million years, after all. Within these 3 years, the greatest breakthrough for Linley was in his soul. After having absorbed 20 million soul essences, the quality of Linley's soul had risen dramatically, and his ability to control his soul was much stronger now as well. In particular, faith energy's nourishment allowed Linley's spiritual energy to be further purified and be controlled more easily. In the past, Linley could only expand or contract his spiritual energy, but now, Linley could control it effortlessly. For example, soul defense. Linley was able to control a large amount of spiritual energy as if it were battle chi, forming a pulse guard defense via the usage of a large amount of spiritual energy which would form a spherical membrane around his sword-shaped soul, protecting it. This pulse guard defense of spiritual energy was far more powerful than the raw patch of spiritual energy which Linley had used to defend himself in the past. In the past, it wasn't that I didn't have any idea of what I wanted to do. It was that I didn't have enough control over my spiritual energy. Linley felt very moved. A more powerful soul, as well as the transformation of his spiritual energy, did indeed bring many changes. Big brother. Warden's voice rang out as he walked into the pocket dimension. Linley opened his eyes. Big bro, the Yulon festival will be in 2 days. Warden said. Linley and Delia would generally pause their training around the Yulon festival. Linley and Delia, exchanging glances, rose to their feet, following Warden out. Yulon Festival. The most important holiday of the Yulon continent. Even in times of war, generally speaking, during these days, there would be a temporary truce, allowing the warriors and commoners to enjoy the Yulon Festival. However, right now, the citizens of the Rohald Empire were filled with terror, grief, and rage. Don't be afraid, child. We're almost there. A thin woman, dressed in tattered clothes, carrying a child on her back, was running towards the north non-stop. Mother, where's father? The 5 or 6-year-old child on her back asked with a confused look. When will father come to see us? I want to see father. Hearing these words, the woman's eyes turned red. Be good. We'll see father soon. But the woman knew very well in her heart, that the two of them, mother and son, would never be able to see the child's father again. It wasn't just the two of them. There were many other fleeing people as well. The entire road was filled with people carrying their possessions and fleeing. A wave of refugees. Today was year 10,044 of the Yulon calendar, January 1st. It should have been a day of celebration. By now, the Barak Empire and the Rohald Empire were separated at the Spring River. The Rohald Empire had 2 powerful prime saints, while on the Barak Empire's side, Linley, despite being a deity now, didn't want to hasten the speed of the battle. The 2 sides had naturally thus fallen into a state of stalemate. Over the past few years, the grand armies of the 2 sides had been separated by Spring River. You call this a war? On the Barak Empire's side, a sentry was grumbling. I've been sent to the front lines for 2 years now, but I haven't killed a single enemy. All we do is stand guard, train, and rest. This is so boring. Isn't this great? People will die in wars. An older soldier next to him clearly didn't like wars. But wars will also have excitement. This sort of life is utterly boring. The younger soldier grumbled. Suddenly, he heard the sound of a commotion from the other side, and he hurriedly turned to look. "Hey, quick, take a look. What's going on, over on the opposite shore?" Actually, the two military camps of the two empires were separated by 2 or 3 kilometers of river water. The sentries all moved forward. Refugees. So many refugees. The two soldiers were both shocked. A large number of refugees streamed around the military camp, rushing towards a large bridge over the Spring River. Only, the bridge was guarded by the soldiers of both sides. However, there were simply too many refugees, and amongst them there were some powerful people as well. Soon, the refugees charged through. Actually, the soldiers on each side didn't try to stop them either. What is going on? The two sentries were very puzzled. Who cares? As long as these refugees don't attack the military camp, don't bother with them. With battle having ground to a halt for 2 years, the soldiers of the two sides weren't too cautious. Generally speaking, refugees who didn't charge the military camps wouldn't be attacked either. They were just some refugees. However, ever since that day, one wave of refugees after another passed through the border between the two countries, from the Rohalt Empire to the Barak Empire. The numbers grew greater and greater, attracting the attention of the Barak Empire. But when they began to investigate, they discovered something astonishing. Within Dragon Blood Castle. Just a few days after the Yulan festival was over, Sina came to visit Linley from the imperial capital. "Uncle, starting a few days ago, there has been a non-stop flow of refugees from the Rohalt Empire to our empire's borders. The number of people coming is simply astonishing." Sina took a deep breath. The most important thing is, it isn't just the citizens of the Rohalt Empire. Even many soldiers are fleeing to our Barak Empire. Huh? What's this all about? Linley was puzzled. The citizens might be fleeing to his side because of danger, but soldiers were under strict supervision. Any who were caught fleeing would be put to death. Sina, speak clearly. Wharton was there as well. Sina nodded. I can put it like this. Citizens and some soldiers are moving in streams. Some fleeing to our empire, others fleeing to the Yulan Empire. The morale of the citizens of the Rohalt Empire has been completely destroyed. What's going on? Linley, hearing this, was shocked. The morale of the citizens had been completely destroyed. Everyone in the empire was fleeing in all directions. This was unheard of. When he had first arrived in the anarchic lands, at that time the anarchic lands were engaged in constant warfare, but there still hadn't been this sort of a large-scale wave of refugees who fled in every which way. After all, people had some affection towards their homelands. If they had any options at all, they wouldn't leave them behind. Did you investigate what this is about? Linley asked. We're not sure. But we did find out one thing, and this one thing, by itself, was enough to make me feel horrified to the bones. Sina's eyes were filled with amazement. Sina took a deep breath. Based on our investigations, many of the cities of the Rohalt Empire have already turned into dead cities. The situation is very similar to what the situation in our Blue Lion city had been. Only, this time, the situation is 100, no, 1,000 times as severe, and it should have happened recently. Dead cities. Linley instantly thought of that deity he had killed. Can it be yet another deity who trains in the edicts of death and is absorbing a large amount of souls? Linley was somewhat puzzled. Zisler had said before that refining souls was an extremely difficult process. Even most full gods weren't capable of such a thing. But a deity who trained in the edicts of death was a very rare thing. It was quite rare for a plane to have a single one. And now there was one? What's more, Linley had killed the last one. If there was yet another deity who trained in the edicts of death, wouldn't he be afraid that Linley would deal with him as well? Or perhaps, is it that this hidden culprit is extremely confident? Linley was far more powerful than he was 3 years ago. His soul was much stronger, and his spiritual energy could now form into a spiritual pulse guard defense. Given that translucent scaly membrane's defense of his soul, Linley had a degree of confidence in dealing with other deities. According to our rough estimates, the population of the dead cities of the Rohald Empire add up to nearly 100 million. Even Sina, when saying this number, felt a cold shudder. The death of 100,000 people in Blue Lion City was already astonishing. 100 million? I'll personally go investigate this affair. Linley's heart was filled with fury. These deities from other planes don't treat the people of our Yulon continent as human beings at all. 100 million? The entire Rohald Empire has only a few hundred million. Currently, the war god and the high priest were not present. The human experts of the Yulon continent at the deity level were only Linley and Desri. The Yulon continent's plane was their homeland. How could Linley possibly forbear and permit these experts from other planes to wantonly slaughter people here? I'm heading out. Linley couldn't sit still for a minute longer. After saying those words to Warden and the others, he flew out of Dragon Blood Castle, then began to fly to the south. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 34, Accepting the Heavy Burden. Linley's sudden departure caused the group of people in Dragon Blood Castle to feel rather worried. Father, is the reason Uncle left just now because he is going to go search for? Sina said softly. Although he didn't finish the words, everyone in the hall understood. They, too, suspected that the culprit behind the large-scale appearance of dead cities in the Rohald Empire was a deity. If Linley were to fight against another deity, what would the result be? I know my big brother's temper very well. Warden furrowed his brows. Although he doesn't like to get involved in things that have nothing to do with him, he definitely will not shirk from any of his responsibilities. Right. Linley's responsibilities. Everyone in the hall, Delia included, nodded slightly. Right now, aside from the human deities in the necropolis of the gods, the only human deities in the Yulon continent were Linley and Desri. Linley and Desri, as deities, stood at the very peak of mankind in this plane. To Linley and Desri, the Yulon continent was their root and foundation. Their homeland. Deities from other planes had descended onto their homeland and had begun to wantonly slaughter humans. At a time like this, as deities, Linley and Desri absolutely had to stand out. If even they stayed hidden and only protected themselves, then didn't that mean that the humans of the Yulon continent would be slaughtered freely by those experts who had fled from the Gabados planar prison? At a time like this, all we can do is rely on Lord Linley and Lord Desri. Sina said softly. In front of deities, even saints had to lower their heads. Only other deities such as Linley and Desri were able to hinder them. Within the quiet mountain village where Desri was living, Linley's sudden arrival naturally was a source of great joy to Desri's people. Reynolds, as well, hadn't seen Linley for a long period of time. He wanted to have a good chat with Linley, but this time, Linley had come on an important mission. Nobody dared to get involved, allowing Linley and Desri to speak in detail. Within the mountain residence, the warbling of the springs could be heard. Linley and Desri were seated facing each other. The two of them were currently the two most powerful humans of the Yulon continent plane. What? Desri suddenly rose to his feet. Linley had just started to speak, but Desri was already shocked. Linley's face was heavy, and he nodded. Right. The citizens of many cities in the Rohald Empire have been utterly slaughtered, and the cities are now dead cities. You should know that this happened in the Barak Empire before as well, but this time, too many cities have died. In just a short period of time, the total number of deaths has exceeded 100 million. Desri's eyes were filled with shock. 100 million. If they had to be killed one at a time, how long would that take? 100 million. A simple number to say. A single town usually had around 10,000 people in it. This represented 10,000 small towns. Linley, what do you think we should do? Desri looked at Linley. Linley rose to his feet. His eyes seemed to be blazing with fire. His voice couldn't help but turn clear and loud. What we should do? Desri, regardless of what happens between the empires of the Yulan continent, these are the affairs of our Yulan continent. Internal affairs. The Yulan continent is our root. I definitely will not permit those deities of other planes to engage in this sort of wide-scale slaughter here. What do they take our place to be? A butchery. Linley's heart was filled with fury. Linley stared at Desri. Desri, are you planning to just hide here? Desri's gaze turned sharp and fierce as well. Linley, what the hell do you think you are saying? Right now, O'Brien and the others are in the necropolis of the gods. Amongst the humans of the Yulan continent, only we two deities are currently present. Do you actually think I would hide away in a time like this? 100 million were killed this time. Who knows how many more will be killed next time? 100 million? A billion? The entire Yulan continent only has a population of a few billion. Most likely, within a few decades, the entire Yulan continent would become entirely devoid of human life. Desri said in a harsh, serious voice. Linley, there are some things that must be done. A long life isn't necessarily a good one. The Yulan continent is our base. I naturally will stand out to defend it. Desri's voice was very firm. Linley revealed a hint of a smile on his face. Desri laughed as well. The two experts now understood what each other was thinking. They actually weren't afraid of death. What they were afraid of was dying like a blade of wild grass, to no purpose whatsoever. To be able to train in the elemental laws to the point of becoming deities meant that both Linley and Desri had extremely strong wills. If they set their mind to something, even if they died, they would accomplish it. If a person had fallen to such straits that even his homeland had become someone else's butcher shop without him doing anything about it, then that would be a life worse than death. The setting sun shone down upon the fleeing refugees on the desolate road, stretching out their shadows. Tattered clothes, dirty and thin faces, eyes filled with both fear as well as hope for the future. They worked hard to move towards the north. In mid-air, Linley and Desri, shoulder to shoulder, came to a halt. By now, Linley and Desri had entered the borders of the Rohald Empire. Let's go down and take a look. Let's ask those refugees. Perhaps we can get a truer understanding of the situation. Desri said. Ever since they had crossed over the border into the Rohald Empire, Linley and Desri's faces had lost their smiles. Their faces were very solemn. The Rohald Empire was in a state of utter chaos. A wind arose, then dispersed. Linley and Desri appeared in the midst of some wild grass by the side of that desolate road, then strode from the grass onto the road. On this road, there were many fleeing refugees. Nobody paid attention to Linley and Desri. How much suffering have they endured? Desri looked at the dim, terrified looks in the eyes of those refugees, sighing as he spoke. Linley had the same feeling in his heart. Linley's gaze suddenly fell on a muscular youngster. That youngster's gaze was resolved, and on his back he was carrying an ancient, silver-haired old lady. Amongst the hundreds of people present, Linley felt that only this youth seemed to have a bit more spirit. And Linley could also tell at a glance that he was a warrior of the 5th rank. Linley immediately walked over, and Desri followed him. Seeing Linley and Desri walk over, the youth instantly looked at the two of them warily. "Milords, what do you need?" This muscular youth had some worldly experience, and he could sense that these two people in front of him were not ordinary. "My friend, I want to ask you a question. What exactly has happened, to cause you all to flee like this?" Linley's attitude was very gentle. Hearing these words, the muscular youth was actually a bit puzzled. "Many of the citizens of our Rohald Empire have been slaughtered, milords. I imagine every refugee knows this. Why do you ask me? I, too, know that many citizens have been slaughtered, and that the number is very high. I am just puzzled. For so many people to have been slaughtered, this shouldn't have been something that happened just a day or two ago. Why is it that you are only fleeing now, after so many people were killed? Linley had been wondering about this the entire time. 100 million people. A saint, even one who killed hundreds of thousands of people each day, would still have to spend several months in slaughter. News of the Dead City events should have spread very quickly. How could the citizens have waited for over 100 million to be slaughtered before they began a wide-scale refugee flight? He had asked Sina this earlier, but all Sina could say was that they hadn't had a chance to investigate this yet. Hearing these words, the muscular youth couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile on his face. Milords, if you asked an ordinary person, they probably really wouldn't know the answer. As he spoke, the muscular youth let out a long sigh. Linley and Desri's eyes couldn't help but light up. Clearly, this muscular youth knew some secrets. Please tell us. Desri spoke. The muscular youth didn't know that the two in front of him were deities. His eyes were filled with a hint of pain and helplessness. This isn't a major secret. When I was stationed in the Barrow Balo Legion, many people there knew about this. The Barrow Legion? How could reclusive experts like Linley and Desri pay attention to the legions of an empire? Roughly 3 years ago, our Barrow Legion, a legion of roughly 300,000 people, was divided into many smaller units. We were sent to various intersections throughout the southern reaches of the empire. Our order was that we were to be stationed there, and that nobody was to be permitted to pass through. Anyone who dared to pass through would be killed. Desri and Linley were secretly shocked. They somewhat understood now. This was why the massacre had claimed 100 million lives before everything had exploded into chaos. At first, we didn't understand either. Although there were a few people who wanted to pass through the intersections we controlled, and they talked about dead cities, we soldiers viewed carrying out our orders as paramount. When they tried to pass, we immediately killed them. Initially, when we killed the first two, we didn't pay attention. But later, one time, one of the people who wanted to flee through our intersection was the good friend of our senior captain. For the sake of our senior captain, we didn't immediately kill him. But who would have thought that this person told us that many cities throughout the southern regions of the empire had been massacred? In the hometown of our senior captain, the only survivor was that friend. The only reason he had survived was because that day, he had went boar hunting in the mountains, and thus he had escaped that calamity. As the muscular youth spoke, his voice shook. By then, we had been stationed there for 2 full months. The muscular youth said bitterly. At that time, our entire unit was stunned. The senior captain immediately sent someone to investigate in the nearby cities. And the result was, well, you should know. The muscular man shook his head. We were preparing to inform the other units, but then we found out that we weren't the first to make this discovery. Another unit had made this discovery before us. Linley and Desri now both understood. When saints moved to exterminate a city, when they spread out their spiritual energy to cover the place, generally speaking nobody would escape their notice. The lucky survivors would generally be like that person who was boar hunting at night. Only when they returned to the city would they realize what happened. Thus, the number of escapees was extremely low. But there were so many possible corridors of escape. A single legion had many subunits. All of them were stationed in separate intersections, and most likely, each of them would only encounter 2 or 3 lucky survivors, but most of those lucky survivors would be slaughtered. After all, obeying orders was paramount. After learning everything, all the brothers in our unit revolted. Our parents, our spouses, or children were all dead. The people in our homeland were all dead. What was the point of us brothers staying in the army? The muscular youth was somewhat angry as well. Compared to those brothers of mine, my luck was a bit better. My homeland wasn't in the south, and so my family members managed to avoid this calamity. The muscular youth turned to look at the old lady he was carrying on his back, his face revealing a hint of concern. "Thank you," Linley said sincerely. At this moment, Linley and Desirie's hearts felt so cold. They could all guess how this came about. Many cities were massacred, and most likely, there were still more saints flying in the air, from city to city, killing those lucky survivors. Those who managed to flee to the army camps were extremely rare. But something like this couldn't be hidden forever. From what this youth said, this slaughter seemed to have been going on for 2 months. Linley made this hypothesis. Linley and Desiree glanced at each other. Both of them quietly snuck back into the wild grass by the road, and then the two of them shot into the air, flying towards the south at high speed. Linley and Desiree both had new targets. "What we need to do is to find those saints located within the Rohald Empire." Linley was very certain that the saints within the Rohald Empire would definitely be aware of a major event like this. In fact, these events should have been carried out by saints. After all, it wasn't too likely that a deity would personally go from city to city slaughtering people. Linley expected that a deity would control and order some saints to go carry this out. What they needed to do was to find out some information about this deity from the saints. Know thy enemy, know thyself. Only then would one win every battle. Book 12. The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 35, Claws and Fangs. As they flew in midair, Linley directly began to search using his divine sense. Southeast. Linley quickly discovered the nearest saint. This saint's aura is very unique, and his appearance is also strange. He isn't human. Let's find him then. A cold, fierce look flashed through Desiree's eyes. HRMPH. There is a better than 90% chance that these saints from other planes obey the commands of that hidden deity. If they didn't engage in slaughter, there is no way they would be able to live so comfortably in the Rohald Empire. Linley nodded slightly. If this person wasn't willing to be in cahoots with that deity, he most likely would have fled long ago. How could he still be staying in the Rohald Empire? Linley and Desiree flew straight towards that foreign saint at high speed. A skinny, black-skinned man with a turban around his head was currently lying comfortably upon a reclining chair. Next to him were beautiful maids who were respectfully holding platters of fruit out to him. The skinny man had a hint of a smile on his face, but these maids were extremely nervous. They all knew that their master's temper was very bizarre. Although he was laughing very merrily right now, sometimes he would brutally begin to whip and abuse them. This sort of life is wonderful. The black-skinned man let out a sigh of content. He had arrived in the Yulan continent plane 4 years ago. His life in the Yulan continent was thousands of times more enjoyable than it had been in the Gabados planar prison. In that place, he was a low-level person, but here in the Yulan continent, he easily controlled the lives and deaths of others. I came a bit later. Many of those fellows arrived 6 years ago. The skinny man actually felt a bit dissatisfied. In the mountain range of magical beasts, that fog-shrouded valley was a place where reality was unstable. Generally speaking, demigods were capable of ripping through space and arriving at the Yulan continent. Even just saints by themselves were capable of ripping open that tier and arriving in the Yulan continent, if 8 of them joined forces. You, come over. The skinny man's gaze swept towards a nearby serving maid. That serving maid instantly knelt down respectfully, raising the fruit platter up high. Only now did that skinny man happily take a piece of fruit, gnawing it contentedly. In his heart, he said to himself, who would have thought that I, Bloom Bulletin Long, would also be able to enjoy these things. In the Gabados planar prison, fruits were things which only deities could enjoy. Only when there was a contrast would one know how lucky one was. Only after one had lost something did one know how to treasure it. Bloom, in his original plane, had been a major figure as well, but when he had power, he didn't care too much about it. After having been trapped in Gabados for so long though, he had learned how to enjoy power. Huh. Bloom's eyes suddenly realized that two people had appeared within the main hall. Bloom was instantly terrified. He was a prime saint, but these two had appeared in his main hall out of nowhere. He stared at them, only to find. Bloom suddenly rose to his feet. "Milords, who are you?" Bloom's attitude was extremely respectful. Bloom had a strange feeling, as though he had once more returned to Gabados. This was the feeling he got when facing a deity, that he had to be extremely subservient. The people in front of Bloom were Linley and Desri. "What is master?" the serving maids were shocked. They had personally witnessed how powerful their master was. "Let them leave." Desri spoke. Bloom immediately looked at those serving maids, urging them to leave with his gaze. The maids nervously, carefully left. While leaving, all of them secretly glanced at Linley and Desri with curiosity and fear. What sort of a person could cause their master to be so terrified? "We are from the Yulon Plain." Linley spoke. Bloom was stunned. But in the next instant, he realized what this man wearing a sky blue robe meant. Clearly, they already knew where he was from. "You should know what our trip here is regarding, yes." Linley and Desri's expressions were cold. Bloom's heart shook. Could it be? Bloom forced out a smile. "Milords, I don't know why." HRMPH Linley let out a cold, angry snort. "Don't tell me you don't know what has been happening during this period of time in the Rohald Empire. Speak. Which deity directed the deaths of those 100 million people from behind the scene?" Bloom's heart lurched. He wanted to speak, but he didn't dare to. He knew exactly how terrifying that deity was. "Milords, I'm only a prime saint. How would I?" Whap. A palm slapped directly on Bloom's face, who was knocked flying away like a ripped sandbag, spewing blood everywhere. Even several of his teeth fell out. His body spun in midair several times before collapsing to the ground. So fast. Bloom was secretly amazed. He didn't even see the move being made. Linley glanced at Bloom coldly, then said calmly, "If you don't tell us, you will die right now. If you do tell us, that deity might not necessarily kill you." "Milords, I'll tell." In front of Linley and Desri, Bloom didn't dare to put on any airs at all. He immediately said, "This affair of killing many humans and collecting their souls was done completely at the direction of Lord Beaumont." "Beaumont?" Linley and Desri exchanged a glance. Yet another foreign name. Yet another deity. Desri said coldly, "Beaumont. I imagine that this Beaumont wouldn't personally go kill the humans, right?" Bloom hesitated slightly, but upon hearing Linley's cold snort, he hurriedly said, "Of course Lord Beaumont wouldn't personally act. He ordered many saints to go act on his behalf. Everyone who helped Lord Beaumont would receive some benefits." Bloom now somewhat realized that these men in front of him most likely were looking to make trouble for Beaumont. "Many saints? I imagine you were amongst them." Desri sneered. "No, not me," Bloom hurriedly said. Bloom was terrified that these people would instantly kill him in fury. How would he dare admit to participating? Linley let out a cold laugh. Actually, this topic was entirely pointless. After all, they hadn't been present. "Fine. I'll ask you. Where is Beaumont?" Linley barked. Bloom shook his head, lost. Linley's face changed, and he stared at Bloom coldly. "It seems you really are quite loyal to Beaumont." Bloom's face changed dramatically. He hurriedly said, "I really don't know. Milords, I'm telling the truth. I only know one thing. Lord Beaumont usually doesn't live at the Yulon continent. He lives in the boundless seas." Linley and Desri glanced at each other, both feeling that the situation just grew tricky. The seas. Although Linley had absorbed 20 million soul essences and his divine sense was powerful, Linley's divine sense still only encapsulated an area of 10,000 kilometers. In the Yulon continent, that was fairly large. But in the endless seas, it was nothing at all. In addition, who knew if Beaumont was on the surface of the ocean, or in the bottom? How do you usually communicate? Desri snapped. We don't communicate, Bloom said hurriedly. Enough bullshit. Linley said coldly. You are able to stay in the Rohalt Empire. How could you have no connection to Beaumont at all? If you keep on lying to us, you know what the consequences will be. Linley was already furious. He could tell that this Bloom wasn't telling the complete truth. The best way to lie was to mix in truth amongst the lies. Bloom was terrified. Instantly, he replied honestly, Milords, Lord Beaumont is extremely cautious. He usually just reaches out to us through his divine sense, one at a time, to arrange us to work for him. He has promised us that after the gold soul peas have been refined, we will get part of the benefits. Gold soul pea? Linley began to understand. Refining soul essences didn't necessarily require a specific amount of souls. For example, 20 million soul essences could be refined into a 2 or 3 centimeter thick gold soul pearl, but a million soul essences could also be refined into smaller gold soul pea. This Beaumont is also capable of refining souls. Linley finally asked the question he wanted to ask. There should only be very few demigods who trained in the edicts of death. Lord Beaumont isn't capable of refining souls. Bloom said with certainty. We all know this. We have heard that amongst the demigods, only the Grand Warlock is able to refine souls, but I heard that the Grand Warlock died 3 years ago. Bloom had stayed in the Gabados prison for a long time, and he knew many things. Linley instantly understood that this Grand Warlock was the person he had killed. If he isn't capable of refining it, why is he collecting souls? Desri asked directly. I don't know the answer to that either. Bloom replied. How often does that Beaumont reach out to you people? Linley asked coldly. Bloom said hurriedly, generally speaking, every 4 to 5 days. He didn't dare to tell the complete truth. The reason it was every 4 to 5 days was because Beaumont would order them to hand over the now-filled soul crystals, while handing over empty ones. How is Beaumont's power, compared to the Grand Warlock? Linley asked. Bloom laughed bitterly. They are all deities. To the likes of us, they are all so far above us. I'm not certain, but I have heard that Lord Beaumont is somewhat more powerful. Linley and Desri exchanged glances, communicating to each other. Fine. Linley said to Bloom. Remember. The next time Beaumont contacts you, inform him to come meet me at Dragonblood Castle. I imagine, he can guess who is looking for him. Linley didn't try to hide his identity. After all of the deities present knew that right now, the only human deities in the Yulon continent were Linley and Desri. There was no need to spell it out. Yes. I will definitely remember to do so. Bloom lowered his head in terror and respect. But by the time he lifted his head, Linley and Desri had already disappeared from within the main hall. Only now did Bloom dare to let out a long sigh. My life is saved. For now. Beaumont was actually hiding in the boundless seas. It truly would be difficult to locate him. Linley and Desri were forced to temporarily choose to go back. On the way back, Linley and Desri both felt vexed by the question of how to deal with Beaumont. Linley, you say we should kill him. Desri looked at Linley. First of all, that Beaumont is stronger than that so-called Grand Warlock. But we are deities who have just reached the demigod stage, how can we compare to him? If we are to act against him, our chances of success are not high. Linley continued to listen. Desri said seriously, that's the first problem. The second problem is, even if we are able to kill Beaumont, I imagine we will still be badly injured. In addition, we don't know how many deities are currently in the Yulon continent. If we are able to kill Beaumont, that will be a good thing. If we are instead killed by him, then, there won't be a single person capable of posing a threat to those deities from other planes. Linley nodded. This was indeed a problem. Actually, the Yulon continent had another person present. Beirut. But Beirut was a magical beast deity. To magical beasts, there wasn't much of a difference between humans and other races. Gwendolen had exploded forth from the mountain range of magical beasts on the apocalypse day. How many humans had died? What's more, Beirut had already said that his requirement was that no one was to cause trouble in the 18 northern duchies or in the Forest of Darkness. He never said that those foreign experts were forbidden from massacring humans. The most important issue is still that we are not strong enough, and that there are too few deities present. Desri frowned as he spoke. Unless all else fails, it is best if we don't fight Beaumont to the death. Although this conclusion was rather hard to swallow, the truth was the enemy was simply too strong. If they weren't able to kill the enemy and were instead killed, wouldn't the humans of the entire Yulon continent be doomed? Even if we don't kill him, we have to demand that he leave the Yulon continent, and also hand over all of the soul essences he took. Otherwise, I want to see if I'm able to kill him or not. Linley wasn't like Desri, he was far more powerful than he had been 3 years ago. Desri looked at Linley, wanting to say something. But suddenly, both Linley and Desri turned to stare towards the north. Yet another person has become a deity. Linley and Desri's eyes were filled with shock. The descent of those natural laws once again enveloped the Yulon continent. Even at a great distance, the descent would cause some ripples, which Linley and Desri were naturally capable of sensing. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 36, Olivier has arrived. Who just became a deity? Linley suddenly thought of multiple possibilities. I hope it isn't a saint from the foreign plains. Desri said softly. Hearing Desri's words, Linley nodded as well. In the Yulon continent, the native deities were already in the minority. If this person who just became a deity was also one of the outsider deities, then their situation would become even worse. Desri, come. Let's go take a look and see who has become a deity. Linley said. Desri hesitated, but then laughed as well. Right. Let's go take a look and see who was so lucky as to break through. With regards to those demigods who had reached that level thousands or tens of thousands of years ago, they were still a bit worried, but they weren't too afraid of new deities. Linley and Desri instantly flew towards the north at high speed. Desri was skilled at high-speed movement as well. After having become a deity, his speed reached an astonishing level. Although he wasn't a match for Linley, as the two flew together, they only needed a short amount of time before arriving in the air above the Forest of Darkness. At this moment, they both could sense that the natural laws and the ripples had vanished. The north, and very far away. Linley frowned. He had just spread out his divine sense, but it only was able to stretch to the edges of the North Sea. It was still quite a distance off from the source of the ripples. Could it be that it was at the Arctic ice cap? Desri guessed. Since it was to the far north of the Yulon continent, there were two possibilities. The first was the North Sea, while the second was the Arctic ice cap. Linley and Desri were both very curious. Who had become a deity? Aside from curiosity, Linley also felt a hint of anticipation. He hoped that the person who had become a deity belonged to the Yulon continent's side. Desri, I've never gone to the Arctic ice cap yet. Would you mind taking a trip with me there? Linley turned his head and chuckled towards Desri. Of course not. Desri was going to suggest the same thing. Immediately, Linley and Desri transformed into blurs, streaking across the sky and flying at high speed towards the Arctic ice cap. In the Yulon plain, the Yulon continent itself actually took up only a small portion of the space. From north to south, the size of the continent was roughly just 20,000 kilometers. Even from east to west, which was much longer, the distance was only 30,000 kilometers or so. Compared to the seas, there was a huge difference. Forget about the South Sea could completely be described as endless. 10,000 Yulon continents would take up less than a tenth of the South Sea. The North Sea, by contrast, was much smaller, but it was still much larger than the Yulon continent. Whoosh! A cold wind blew. The further north they went, the colder it became. In addition, this was still January. It was the coldest season. Even at Linley's speed, they had to fly for several hours before they were able to see that utterly white, distant Arctic ice cap. Linley and Desri landed at the edge of the Arctic ice cap. The Arctic ice cap truly is an astonishing sight. Linley sighed in praise. This place was too cold. The cold wind felt like wind blades. Weaker warriors who arrived in this place would be chopped to pieces by the wind. But of course, to Linley and Desri, the cold wind was nothing at all. The Arctic ice cap was formed from one enormous iceberg after another. In the Yulon continent, mountains that were over 10 kilometers high were quite rare, but here, icebergs that were over 10 kilometers high were commonplace. There was sunlight in the Arctic ice cap, but the sunlight here didn't carry any warmth with it. The wind which constantly blew pieces of ice about made the world seem so grey and indistinct. So the one who became a deity really was Olivier. Linley revealed a hint of a smile on his face. "You found him." Desri's face instantly revealed a look of wild joy. Desri, despite having trained for thousands of years, in terms of soul strength, was far inferior to Linley, who had absorbed 20 million soul essences. This was the reason why Beaumont and the Grand Warlock wanted to refine soul essences so badly. "Come with me." Linley flew in a straight line towards the northeast, and Desri followed behind him. After flying for roughly several thousand kilometers, Linley and Desri arrived at the base of an enormous iceberg, roughly 100,000 meters tall. By now, Desri had also discovered that Olivier was living deep within this enormous iceberg. At this moment, a man with long silvery white hair walked out from a tunnel within the enormous iceberg. "Linley, Desri, please come in." Olivier actually had a hint of a smile on his face. Linley and Desri were both shocked. Oliver's hair had been a mix of black and white, but currently, Oliver's hair was silvery white. In addition, the current Oliver's aura was very close to light. "Olivier, you reached the demigod level through the laws of light." Desri spoke out. Olivier didn't respond. He only nodded. Linley and Desri immediately flew down and followed Olivier into the tunnel. This ice cave was extremely deep. Linley and Desri made many turns and curves within it, and occasionally flew downwards. After flying for a few dozen kilometers, they arrived at Oliver's abode. "It's so cold here." Desri sighed. Olivier lived deep within the enormous iceberg. It truly was very cold here. It was dozens of times colder than in the outside areas of the Arctic ice cap. Drip drop. There was a pool of water nearby. The ice above it actually had green drops of water dripping down into it, which emanated an astonishing cold. "This is the coldest place in the entire Arctic ice cap," Olivier said with a laugh. "In the past, I continuously dug deeper. You don't know how tough the ice in the deepest parts of this place is. It definitely is comparable to some extremely valuable ores. After digging for a long time, I finally dug to the core. Which is to say, this place." Olivier pointed towards that pool of water. "My mystic ice's word came from that freezing pool as well." For there to be a pool of water in such an astonishingly cold place was already quite bizarre. But it actually had this mystic ice's word within it. Linley and Desri were both guessing that this mystic ice's word had to have had a major history behind it. "Come, let's sit inside." Olivier led Linley and Desri into a large hall which he had dug out. Ah! Linley and Desri were both shocked. Within this hall, there was another Olivier, with a head full of long black hair. The white-haired Olivier walked over, and then fused into one with the black-haired Olivier. The two Oliviers became one, and then his hair became grey. Bizarre. Olivier, I didn't expect, Linley and Desri both began to laugh, that not only did you reach the deity level in the laws of light, you also became a deity in the laws of darkness. Amazing, amazing. Right, where is your original body? Desri immediately asked. For Olivier to be able to create two divine clones meant that, with his original body added in, he should have three bodies. I made the decision to have one divine spark go into my body, while the other one went outside. Olivier said calmly. I don't want to train in any other laws. As long as I can train to the limit in both the laws of light and the laws of darkness, that will be enough for me. Linley and Desri both nodded secretly. Since he had chosen to train in just those two elemental laws, there truly was no need for him to have three bodies. If he had done that, his soul would have been split into three pieces. By making his current decision, Olivier only had to split his soul in half. Puzzled, Linley asked, Olivier, what about your hair? When you became a deity in two different aspects, you should have silvery white hair when you are using your divine light clone. When you are using your divine darkness clone, you should have black hair. Why is it that when you fuse the two, this is the result? Because. Olivier laughed calmly. After my two bodies fuse, I can fuse light divine power alongside darkness divine power and use them together. As for my hair, it's just formed from divine power. I can make it look like whatever I like. Linley and Desri didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. They hadn't imagined that Olivier would have this side to him. But they were very surprised. Linley knew very well that it was impossible to combine two different types of energy. For Olivier to have accomplished it undoubtedly meant that his power had dramatically increased. Olivier, can you tell us how you accomplished this? Desri hesitated for a long while before asking. Olivier glanced at him, but still answered. Linley, remember my duel against Hatesun? You were watching back then. I remember. Linley nodded. Hatesun had nearly killed Olivier, but 10 years or so later, Olivier had went to challenge him again, and this time had killed Hatesun with a single blow. That time, I was in a coma for several months. After waking up, I was able to fuse the two types of power and use them together. Olivier said it very simply, but this answer caused Linley and Desri to both feel astonished. Even if others knew the way, they couldn't possibly duplicate it. Linley began to understand as well. Many people had been puzzled as to why Olivier had been in a coma for so many months after being badly wounded by Hatesun. This was because no matter how badly damaged the body was, light-style healing magic could repair it. So why was Olivier still in a coma? It wasn't strange for a saint to die, but for a saint to be in a coma for months was something one might not see in 10,000 years. Nobody had known, back then, why he was in a coma. But now, they somewhat understood. That coma had something to do with his soul. Most likely, it is the reason for why Oliver's soul is so special now. Linley still remembered how the Beholder King had attempted to freeze Oliver's soul, only to fail. Linley glanced at Olivier. I wager this Olivier has left out some of the details. This transformation of his souls definitely impacts the way in which he trains in the profound mysteries of these two opposite laws. Linley understood this, but naturally, he wouldn't inquire into someone else's training methods. It was enough for one to train himself properly. Olivier, we have come on an important mission, this time. Linley went straight to the point, describing what had happened in the Rohald Empire to Olivier, as well as the situation in the Yulan continent in general. Olivier, listening to this, frowned. I didn't expect that in 9 years, the Yulon continent would have so many things happen. Olivier. What is your decision regarding these many outsider experts? Will you stay here in the Arctic ice cap, or will you? Linley looked expectantly towards Olivier. Olivier wielded that mysterious mystic Isis word, and also had two divine clones that were fused together. His power was such that even Linley wasn't confident in his ability to defeat him. Linley wasn't jealous of Olivier. Quite the contrary, he was very happy. At this point in time, the more powerful the native forces of the Yulon continent were, then the easier it would be for them to protect the Yulon continent. Do you need to ask? A hint of a cold smile was on Oliver's lips. This is our turf. Those bastards dare to come to our place and massacre people? If we don't act, they'll think we're afraid of them. Olivier had always been utterly fearless. When he had just arrived in the Arctic ice cap, he had dared to immediately go challenge Rutherford. What's more, now that I'm a deity, it's impossible for me to make any further breakthroughs in a short period of time. It's time to go out and have a good fight. Oliver's eyes were flashing with a hint of fire. So many outsider experts have come. How can I give up such a good chance to have a fight? Linley and Desri glanced at each other. It seemed they had worried for nothing. Given Oliver's temperament, he wouldn't be willing to live in the Arctic ice cap like before, now that he was a deity. Olivier glanced at Linley. Actually, there was something he hadn't said. In the necropolis of the gods, Linley had saved him several times. If nothing else, for the sake of Linley's kindness towards him alone, Olivier definitely wouldn't shirk his duties and hide. Haha, excellent. With you by our side, Olivier, how can the three of us be afraid of that Beaumont? Linley laughed loudly. Beaumont. I want to see if he is capable of blocking this sword of mine. Oliver's eyes were filled with confidence. Desri began to laugh as well. Let's go. Let's go to Linley's Dragon Blood Castle. He's already arranged to let that outsider saint inform Beaumont to come look for us at Dragon Blood Castle. Desri spoke. We'll wait for Beaumont there at Dragon Blood Castle. Linley began to chuckle. I wonder, if that Beaumont was to use his divine sense to search and discovered that we have three deities present, will he be so frightened that he won't even dare come? Olivier and Desri couldn't help but laugh as well. And then, Linley, Desri, and Olivier, the three deities, left the Arctic ice cap, traversed the North Seas, and returned to Dragon Blood Castle. Within Dragon Blood Castle, they quietly awaited Beaumont's arrival. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 37, The Great Botalevi. The Yulon Continent. The Rohald Empire. Bloom's residence. Lord Beaumont. Bloom bowed respectfully. Beaumont was tall and muscular. His entire body was covered in a black cloak. Next to Beaumont were four extremely respectful saint-level experts. Beneath the black hood, Beaumont's gloomy eyes stared at Bloom. Bloom, is everything which you transmitted to me mentally earlier true? Absolutely true. If I, Bloom, said a single false word, then you can kill me, Lord Beaumont. Bloom was very respectful. Beaumont was silent. Bloom didn't dare to say a single extra word. Beaumont was a person with a brutal temper. The Gabados planar prison was actually just a single, special plane. Naturally, it was extremely large. And there were many internal territories within, which the many deities scattered throughout the prison had claimed. Amongst them, Beaumont, Muba, the Grand Warlock, and Dylan were all in the same general area. And within this area, Muba was a kind, good-natured fellow. The Grand Warlock was sinister and cold. Beaumont was brutal. And of course, Dylan was the most powerful of the demigods. Even Beaumont didn't dare to offend Dylan. However, one day, Dylan simply vanished. Dylan's disappearance caused Beaumont to become the local tyrant of their area. Only at the very end did the experts of this area slowly begin to learn that Dylan had left through a weak point in space. After that, Beaumont, Muba, the Grand Warlock, and some saints had all passed through it as well. Naturally, they didn't notify any others. Thus, the only people who had arrived in the Yulon continent were the few experts who lived close to that spatial weak point in the planar prison. Naturally, the vast majority of experts within the prison weren't aware of their escape. As for that weak point in space, if someone wasn't right on top of it, there is no way one would notice it. This was the reason why Bloom had arrived in the Yulon continent only 4 years ago. Even in that very area, there were still many saints who had no idea there was an escape and were still suffering within the planar prison, much less the experts in other areas. Thus, there weren't that many outsider deities in the Yulon continent. There were just a few more saints than normal. All of these saints, in turn, knew very well how terrifyingly brutal Beaumont's temper could be. "Bloom, I'm giving you an assignment," Beaumont said coldly. Bloom bowed. "Immediately go to Dragon Blood Castle. Invite Linley and the other deity to meet me, and say that I, Beaumont, tomorrow morning, will wait for them at the great Bota levee of the Yulon River," Beaumont said calmly. "Go immediately. Don't dawdle." Bloom was startled. Originally, Linley had asked Beaumont to go pay a visit to Dragon Blood Castle. But now, Beaumont was arranging to go to the great Bota levee. "Yes, Lord Beaumont." Bloom didn't dare to disobey. He immediately transformed into a blur and streaked towards the north. Beaumont turned and glanced at the others. "Chiquita, you keep refining souls," Beaumont said calmly. "Yes, Lord Beaumont." One of the 4 saints behind spoke, a man who was tall and muscular, his entire body covered with a white cloak. "Chiquita." It was indeed the same Chiquita who had fled from the Sacred Isle. Whenever Chiquita thought about what his life had been like after he had fled from the Sacred Isle, he felt miserable. He, Chiquita, was a member of the three-eyed winged men race in the divine plane of light. Many deities viewed the three-eyed winged men as a precious race. Why? Three-eyed winged men had a special ability. Their third eye was naturally capable of refining souls. In the eyes of many deities, the three-eyed winged men were like a silkworm. If they could capture a three-eyed winged man, they could keep him bound and order him to refine souls for them to enjoy. Thus, it was very common in many places for three-eyed winged men to be kept as pets. This Chiquita was a three-eyed winged man. In the Gabados planar prison, he had been captured by a deity and had suffered greatly. Afterwards, that deity had died, and he had luckily managed to escape. He usually hid his third eye, and amongst the other saints, claimed that he was a winged man, a type of beastman. Finally, after a long time, he had been lucky enough to escape to the Yulon continent. In the Yulon continent, his power was naturally, unquestionably, at the prime saint level. At the sacred Isle of the Radiant Church, he enjoyed countless amounts of souls. When he saw that the divine phantasm had died, he immediately fled by himself and abandoned Haydn's. But after living just a few good years in the Yulon continent, he was discovered by Beaumont. Beaumont was overjoyed. He had been bitter this entire time over the fact that with the Grand Warlock dead, there was now no one capable of refining a gold soul pearl for him. "Just keep refining for me. HRMPH. I know exactly how many soul essences are produced from how many souls. Don't try to steal any. Keep working hard and refining for me, and at the end, I will grant you 1/10 of the souls you have refined." Beaumont was still quite generous. What could Chiquita do? Under Beaumont's orders, all he could do was to continue helping to refine souls. This was the reason why Beaumont had suddenly engaged in a wide-scale massacre. If he didn't have Chiquita, he, Beaumont, truly wouldn't have any method of acquiring soul essences. Late at night. Dragon Blood Castle. The lamps were shining. Yulon River, the great Bota levee. Linley glanced at the extremely respectful Bloom. Fine. I understand. You can leave now. Yes. Bloom bowed respectfully, then immediately flew away from Dragonblood Castle. Within the main hall of Dragonblood Castle, Linley, Desri, and Olivier were all present. At the same time, Linley's friends and family were present as well. The great Beautalevi. This Beaumont really knows how to pick a place. Desri snickered. It seems this Beaumont knows a little bit about the history of the Yulan continent. Linley sighed in praise. He even knows about the great Beautalevi. For him to choose the great Beautalevi means that he has the intention of resolving this matter peacefully with us. The nearby Olivier nodded slightly as well. The great Beautalevi was an extremely famous scenic spot in the Yulan continent. The great Beautalevi, according to legend, was built even before the start of the Yulan calendar. In other words, the age of the great Beautalevi was at least 10,000 years old. Although it had endured 10,000 plus years of storms and disasters, the great Beautalevi was still undamaged and unblemished. This was indeed an amazing, bizarre thing. 5,000 years ago, the war god and the high priest had engaged in battle at the Yulan River, with the result being a draw. They thus entered a settlement at the great Beautalevi, and agreed upon boundaries for their two empires. For Beaumont to choose this location was most likely a sign that he wanted to settle with them. He wants to settle with us. Olivier snorted coldly. Desri recommended, Olivier, we have to look at the big picture. Right now, we don't know how many outsider deities have arrived at the Yulan continent. Making them hesitate is enough. There's no need to necessarily go all out. We don't know exactly how powerful Beaumont is, anyhow. Olivier didn't say anything else. Warden, the rest of you can go and get some rest. Linley turned and said to his family members. Warden and the others were nervous. But it wasn't appropriate for them to interject themselves into the conversations of these three deities, Linley, Desri, and Olivier. Hearing Linley's words, Warden spoke out. Big bro, if it's possible to avoid fighting tomorrow, it's best to not fight. Enough. Don't worry. Linley laughed as he patted Warden on the shoulders. Immediately afterwards, a large group of people left the main hall. Olivier. Linley looked at Olivier. HRM. Olivier was a bit puzzled. Olivier, now that you have two powerful divine bodies, when they are fused, I expect your attack power will be very great. But Olivier, I hope you will be a bit more cautious. In truth, Linley was worried about Olivier the most. Desri knew that he was weak, and thus would be very careful. But it would be terrible if this Olivier went to fight all out with the enemy, and was killed by him instead. As Linley viewed it, Olivier was a talent as well. I know. Olivier nodded. Linley laughed, then said, Olivier, Desri, I have to tell you something. It is regarding divine artifacts. Linley immediately told Desri and Olivier everything which Muba had told him. Hearing this, Olivier and Desri were both shocked. Desri, after having become a deity, had been gifted a divine artifact by Linley as well. The main reason was, after killing the Grand Warlock, Linley once again had extra divine artifacts. But Desri didn't have a single divine artifact, so Linley naturally gave him one. Olivier, I have the feeling that your attacks primarily rely on the opposing forces of light and darkness. But I have to remind you of something. Strength is just one aspect, divine artifacts themselves also need to be utilized well. Linley reminded. Divine artifacts have their own souls. You need to learn how to let your attacks become one with your divine artifact. Olivier was somewhat puzzled. As he saw it, his sword skills didn't actually have much to do with his weapons. Olivier, spend some time carefully reflecting on it. The way of training for deities is very complicated and vast. It definitely isn't as simple as you think it is. Also, don't underestimate this Beaumont. Linley could tell that Olivier, because of that battle with Hatesun, had a transformation occur in his soul, with light and darkness fusing. Relying on that, Oliver's training speed had increased by leaps and bounds. But just by watching Oliver's attacks in the necropolis of the gods, Linley had seen that the attacks were simply too ordinary. They were just simple blows. They completely relied on the power of those two opposite, fused energy sources. Linley was different. Whether it was in terms of understanding the laws of the earth or the elemental laws of the wind, Linley continued to try and think of methods to increase his attack power. From the rippling wind to the tempos of the wind, he had continuously developed his power, up until the end, with the dimensional decapitator. Linley had always sought more powerful attacks. The laws were one aspect, but applying them was another aspect. It was just like fusing a divine core. If you understood the laws, but not how to apply them, how useful would it be? The path of training is indeed boundless, with countless roads to take. Linley thought back to the 3 years of training he had undergone. His original body had trained in the laws of the earth, but when Linley's divine wind clone had been researching the profound truths of velocity, it had also been analyzing the blood violet sword. As soon as he had heard Muba discuss divine artifacts, Linley had begun analyzing blood violet. When Linley had first filled blood violet with divine power, causing it to vibrate and emit that soul-shaking sound, Linley had immediately known, this sort of soul attack has no specific target. In a real battle, it would probably attack both friends and foes. Its real attack, however, should be able to be aimed at a specific target. Linley had immediately understood that in reality, he still didn't understand a single thing about blood violet. In addition, in the past, I was able to utilize the baleful aura to attack others. And now? Also, the Grand Warlock was able to use his spiritual energy to attack people. Then how about me? Can I fuse a spiritual energy attack into the physical attack of blood violet? These were the things which Linley had spent 3 full years analyzing. Linley was constantly exploring the special qualities of blood violet. He merged that strange sound, his spiritual energy, the innate special qualities of blood violet, as well as the laws of the wind. Linley had spent nearly 2 years on this, and in the end, he was finally able to develop the true attack from that basic, omnidirectional vibration. This was the first attack he had developed based on blood violet itself. Only at that moment did he and his divine artifact truly work together. After that experience, Linley understood even more the relationship between a person and his divine artifact. After reaching the deity level, understanding the laws is one aspect. But how to properly apply those laws and bring out greater power from the laws is another important aspect. Linley understood that actually, compared to 3 years ago, his understanding of the profound truths of velocity hadn't improved that much. But in terms of attack power, when blood violet itself was matched with Linley's dramatically strengthened spiritual energy, the attack that he had developed was already far more powerful than the dimensional decapitator attack he had previously used. Only, executing that attack uses up far too much of my spiritual energy. Unless it is absolutely necessary, I can't use it. I hope this Beaumont knows what is good for him. Linley, in his heart, still felt extremely confident. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 38, Smiling Meekly. The great Botalevi stretched all the way from the banks of the Yulon River to the center. Right. The great Botalevi was extremely strange. It was like a massive dock or wharf. Logically speaking, for it to have stretched all the way to the center, the thousands of years of pounding by the waves of the Yulon River should have been able to even grind a mountain down. However, the great Botalevi had existed for 10,000 plus years without being damaged at all. This was indeed quite strange. Precisely because it was so strange, the great Botalevi was famous throughout the Yulon continent. Yulon calendar, year 10,044, January 16th. At the Yulon River's intersection between the Rohald Empire and the Yulon Empire. The Great Botalevi. Normally, this was an extremely rowdy place, but today, there wasn't a single person who could draw near the Great Botalevi. Because over 10 saints were currently guarding this place, maintaining an iron order, not permitting anyone to draw near it. On the banks of the river, many people were gathered there, watching. Over 10 saints. I've never seen so many saints in my entire life. A powerful, muscular middle-aged man was so excited, his eyes were shining. He kept on staring towards the distant Great Botalevi. What is going on today? What is going to happen? Hey, are those saints? No way. The onlookers grew more and more numerous. The latecomers didn't believe it. What do you know? I personally watched those many saints descend from the skies and force everyone back, not permitting anyone to enter the Great Botalevi. Someone had arrived very early at the Great Botalevi, and had watched the saints fly down. So many saints. What are they up to? Also, who is that bald guy sitting atop the Great Botalevi? The watchers grew more and more numerous. Everyone's gaze was directed towards the Great Botalevi. The only person seated there on a chair was a tall, muscular bald man, dressed in a black robe. He didn't cover up his face. In front of this tall, bald man was a round table, with a flask of fine wine on top. Yet another saint has arrived. The crowd let out a murmur of surprise. The many onlookers watched as 3 figures flew over from the north. These 3 figures slowed down as they neared the Great Botalevi, finally landing atop it. Shoulder to shoulder, the 3 walked towards the tall bald man. In a few moments, they arrived at the round table. I didn't realize there would be 3 of you. Ah, my apologies. The tall bald man dressed in a black robe had a face filled with tight flesh, but he still squeezed out a smile. I only prepared 2 chairs. Immediately, the bald man glanced to the side. Clearly, he had sent a mental message. Instantly, a saint produced a seat from somewhere, immediately flying over and respectfully setting it down, before respectfully retreating yet again. That is not your fault, Mr. Beaumont. Desri said with a calm laugh. Linley, Desri, and Olivier all sat down. Originally, Linley had only instructed Bloom to say that there were 2 deities. Beaumont was also rather surprised that 3 had shown up. Only, Beaumont didn't care at all. It seems that the person who became a deity a few days ago belonged to their side. Beaumont secretly said to himself. Just became a deity? HRMPH, those new early-stage demigods, I can fight them 10 at a time. Beaumont swept his gaze towards Linley. Of the 3, the only one he was slightly concerned about was Linley. After all, 3 years ago, Linley had killed the Grand Warlock. This Linley could not only kill the Grand Warlock, he was able to survive the Grand Warlock's ultimate attack. Linley, Desri, and Olivier only looked at Beaumont. Haha, Beaumont let out a carefree laugh. Mr. Linley, since you wanted to meet with me, naturally I wouldn't dare to refuse. I don't know why you 3 have come, Mr. Linley. Is there something you need of Beaumont? If there is, please feel free to tell me. I, Beaumont, am a very easygoing fellow. Beaumont's voice was very loud. But, the distant onlookers didn't hear it, because Beaumont had already utilized his God realm. This God realm was formed from a simple form of control over Beaumont's elemental energy. Linley, Desri, and Olivier were all deities. Naturally, they wouldn't care about such a simple use of a God realm. Even if Beaumont had used his God realm at full force, it wouldn't be much of a threat. The God realm was actually what made the difference between a deity and a saint, but upon becoming a deity, it no longer had much of an impact on you. Mr. Beaumont, you should know why we have come. Linley stared at him. Beaumont was slightly surprised, but then he laughed loudly. Mr. Linley, you must be jesting. If you don't tell me, How should I know? The nearby Olivier said coldly, 100 million people died in the Rohald Empire. 100 million. Beaumont, you really are ruthless. What do you take our Yulon continent to be? You think you can kill as many as you wish. Mr. Beaumont, we all know what's going on. No need to play dumb. Linley said as well. Beaumont let out an awkward chuckle. The people who died in the Rohald Empire, well, fine, I admit it. I was the one who arranged for those 100 million people to be killed. What of it? Linley, the three of you have already become deities. You still care about those commoners. Beaumont had a very surprised look on his face. Are you joking? Linley's face couldn't help but sink. Desri spoke now as well. Beaumont, the Yulon continent is our homeland. If we allow you to keep killing as you please, the people in our homeland will all be dead. The three of us would be ashamed to keep living after that. Beaumont, go ahead and speak. How should we resolve this? How to resolve this? Hearing these words, Beaumont secretly laughed. Indeed. They don't want to fight with me. Then this will be easy to handle. Olivier let out a cold snort from the side. This, well, I'm really sorry about this. Beaumont sighed. How about this? You are worried that everyone in your homeland will die, right? Then I promise, after killing another 100 million, I'll stop. How about that? Another 100 million, to the Yulon continent, is nothing at all. Kill another 100 million? Linley, Desri, and Oliver's hearts instantly filled with rage, and their faces turned cold. Seeing the situation, Beaumont couldn't help but laugh. Ha ha, just kidding, just kidding. Linley, you people really can't take a joke. I won't kill any more. I guarantee that I won't kill any more of the citizens of your Yulon continent. Good enough, right? Oliver's face was as cold as ice. Desri's face was rather ugly to behold as well. Linley's face was cold. Beaumont, we won't waste words. Agree to 2 requirements, and this will be done with. Speak. The fierce-looking face of Beaumont was still covered with smiles. First, from today onwards, you are not permitted to kill a single member of the Yulon continent. In addition, the souls of the citizens of the Yulon continent that you collected, whether refined or not, must all be handed to us. Linley said coldly. Beaumont's smile instantly disappeared. The second requirement is, once we are finished, you must leave the Yulon plain. Our Yulon plain does not welcome you here. Linley finished. Beaumont's face sank down. Leave the Yulon plain. Beaumont said. This isn't out of the question. But you can't be in a rush. You need to give me some time. Desri spoke as well. Beaumont, you have collected the souls of the citizens of the Yulon plain. You'd best hand them over quickly. No matter if they are refined into soul essences or not, all of them need to be handed over. Hand them over. You aren't qualified to use them. Don't have them. The souls have gone to the netherworld. Beaumont said bluntly. I'm not able to refine souls. Why would I want them? Beaumont's heart was starting to fill with rage as well. Even Muba and the Grand Warlock wouldn't dare to act so presumptuously before him. When he ordered the Grand Warlock to refine a gold soul pearl, the Grand Warlock didn't dare to openly refuse him. If it wasn't for the fact that he knew a few things about Linley, how would he, Beaumont, have already lowered himself this much? When the Grand Warlock had died, Beaumont had been very shocked, and so he immediately went to investigate Linley. Afterwards, when he captured a disciple of the War Gods College, he had learned that Linley had some sort of a relationship with Beirut. This was the reason why, all these years, Beaumont had never gone to Linley to get his revenge. He didn't want to make Linley his enemy. Beaumont, to his dying day, would never forget how terrifying Beirut was. Gone to the netherworld? What a joke. Olivier immediately stood up. Beaumont, you are lying. Linley and Desri both stood up as well. They were both angry now. This Beaumont had actually slaughtered 100 million people, then acted like nothing was amiss. He just wanted to say, fine, I won't do it anymore. He was neither willing to return the souls, nor leave the Yulon plain. With things having come to this stage, there was nothing to discuss. Lying? How am I lying? Beaumont stood up as well. We already know that you are collecting souls. Do you think we don't know what you ordered those saints to do? Desri said coldly. Beaumont suddenly turned and stared furiously at the distant Bloom. Bloom. Bloom instantly knelt down in terror, but his body was already lifted up by the power of the Godrealm. He was utterly incapable of movement now. Die. Beaumont waved his hand, and a ray of grey divine power flew straight into Bloom's body. Bloom watched in terror as that death-type divine power flew towards him, but he couldn't move at all. The death-type divine power wrapped around his body, instantly transforming him into a heap of dust. Linley, Olivier, and Desri all watched carefully, prepared to act at any moment. Turning his head, Beaumont stared at Linley and the others. Linley, Beaumont, will make things clear to you today. I'll give you face and no longer kill the people of your Yulon plain. You give me face as well. This matter will be at an end. If you aren't willing, then I don't mind teaching you a lesson on behalf of Lord Beirut. What type of talk is this? Linley laughed coldly. Beaumont, you killed 100 million people. 100 million. Now, you are just going to say you won't kill any more, without accepting any punishment at all, and just have this matter be at an end. And you say this is giving me face. Linley felt this was absolutely laughable. This Beaumont was absolutely too domineering. Oh, it seems you don't want to give me face. Beaumont's face sank. He had already made up his mind. This Linley and Lord Beirut has some sort of connection. I can't kill him for now. But I still have to teach him a lesson. As for the other two next to him, I'll kill them. This will serve to frighten Linley as well. Don't think I'm as weak as that warlock. It isn't that we aren't willing to give you face. It's that you are simply too arrogant and demanding. Linley's heart began to fill with a killing intent as well. Olivier and Desri's bodies were slowly beginning to be surrounded with divine power as well. You really Beaumont, have been smiling meekly all day today and giving you face, Linley. Who the hell do you think Beaumont, am? Since when have I ever smiled so meekly? I give you face, but you don't want to take it. Beaumont slapped the table viciously. With a boom, the table disintegrated into countless pieces, and Beaumont's fierce face was trembling. Fine. Then this isn't my fault. Lord Beirut, today, I will teach Linley a lesson on your behalf. A deep blue warblade suddenly appeared within Beaumont's hands. Swoosh. 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 Linley, Desri, and Olivier both retreated into the air at the same time. In Linley's hands appeared the devilish blood violet. In Desri's hands, a slender sword. As for Olivier, in his hands appeared the mystic Isis word. Beaumont, you call this smiling meekly? Linley was so furious, he began to laugh. You call this giving me face? You killed 100 million people of my Yulon plain but aren't willing to pay any price at all, and you call that giving me face? And that you are going to teach me a lesson on behalf of Lord Beirut? What type of a thing are you? On what basis can you do anything on behalf of Lord Beirut? And what's more, you think you have the power to discipline me? Linley's wind-style divine power filled Blood Violet. This time, Blood Violet didn't make any sound at all. This fellow really is a bastard. Desri was also angered to the point of laughing. Desri, the most even-tempered of the three, had also been utterly enraged by Beaumont. Beaumont, the long, deep blue blade in his hands, quirked his lips, his face fierce. Die! Beaumont roared with brutal rage. His voice was still echoing in the air, but he had already charged towards Olivier. Beaumont had already made his decision that first he would kill Desri and Olivier, and only then would he teach Linley his lesson. Book 12, The Descent of the Gods, Chapter 39, Creating a Catastrophe. The saints that had been maintaining order all immediately retreated to the river banks. As for the increasingly large number of watchers, all of them stared with wide eyes in shock. Just then, Bloom's sudden death had already caused great shock to these commoners. Because they had seen Bloom fly in the sky. Bloom was a saint, but he had died without being able to fight back at all. To these ordinary people, that was simply inconceivable. That was a saint. At this moment, the fierce-faced Beaumont was howling through the air, charging towards Olivier, that deep blue warblade in his hands chopping viciously down towards Olivier. But what welcomed him was Oliver's dazzling sword. Darkness and light coinciding. Bang! The warblade and the mystic Isis word collided, and the terrifying force of the collision blasted forth towards ground. The great Boutalevi's entire surface layer cracked with a boom sound, and then transformed into dust. A layer of the great Boutalevi that was fully a meter deep was blown away, revealing that pitch-black rocky material within it. The reason why the great Boutalevi was able to remain undamaged for 10,000 plus years was because of this strange material. The shock wave continued down, causing a massive depression within the waters of the Yulon River, then exploded out, casting countless waves in every direction. Drops of water shot out like arrows, and wherever they landed, people cried out in agony, with blood splatting everywhere. Instantly, the many citizens watching at the river banks grew terrified, quickly retreating backwards non-stop. Rumble, a strange surge of white light rippled forth from Desri's chest. This surge of strange, rippling white light was simply too fast, instantly reaching Beaumont's body. Beaumont, feeling some pain, let out a single growl. These bastards! Beaumont stared at the distant Desri and Olivier. He had miscalculated. He had thought that as Desri and Olivier had just become deities, they should have very ordinary levels of strength. Dealing with them shouldn't be difficult. But who would have imagined, that just then, Oliver's attack had actually been slightly more powerful than his own Warblade's attack. As for Desri, he had that strange soul attack. You want to kill us? In your dreams. Oliver's face was ice cold. At this moment, Linley glanced at Desri, secretly sighing. Desri trains in the elemental laws of light, focusing on the soul. Indeed, upon becoming a deity, soul-based attacks are extremely hard to defend against. Even Beaumont suffered somewhat. Desri was most proficient at matters pertaining to the soul. Linley, I can deal with this Beaumont by myself. Olivier transmitted mentally. Olivier was completely confident in himself, and he immediately transformed into a ray of light, instantly piercing through the sky and arriving in front of Beaumont. Bang! Beaumont's body instantly began to emit a rippling gray energy aura which instantly covered an area of 10 meters around him. Swoosh! Olivier instantly flew backwards and retreated. Oliver's face was ashen. While flying back, he immediately transmitted mentally, careful, that grey divine power covering his body has a very strange force. When I drew near it, I felt my entire body become weak. It was very bizarre. Olivier took a deep breath, and his face slowly began look a bit better. Desri and Linley were both secretly shocked. Linley knew that, having been at the demigod level for so long, this Beaumont definitely had some powerful attacks. Ha ha, Beaumont let out a wild laugh, then stared at Linley and the other two with a murder in his eyes. It seems I underestimated you. If I don't use a bit of my real power, it really will be hard to kill you. Then, prepare to die. After finishing speaking, Beaumont charged forward, his entire body surrounded by that roiling grey aura. His target was still Olivier and Desri. Olivier and Desri's faces were very solemn. Rumble, Desri's chest once again emitted that strange, rippling white light which streaked towards Beaumont. But this time, Beaumont seemed to be unaffected, while at the same time he struck out with his warblade, covered with grey light, in a lightning-fast chopping blow towards Olivier. Arg! Olivier let out an angry sound, and the darkness and light divine power around his body formed into a protective armor. Instantly, a black and white sword flash appeared, and space itself ripped apart. When that black-white sword flash and that blue warblade collided, the only thing that could be heard was repeated collision sounds. Not good. Linley knew that the situation was dire. Suddenly, a faint green figure charged straight in. Countless devilish violet sword flashes appeared, creating countless tears in space. This was the rippling wind, dimensional decapitator attack. Countless violet flashes of light, each of which contained a dimensional decapitator, stabbed out. The countless sword shadows' appearance and attacks caused even Beaumont, despite his power, to only be able to respond sluggishly. How bizarre! Linley's heart trembled. He could sense that Beaumont's warblade seemed to have transformed into layers of waves, crashing down upon him, while he himself was nothing more than a small boat within the waves that could be capsized at any moment. In addition, the warblade waves contained within them a strange, deathly aura which was constantly affecting his soul. If his soul was weak, he might have become dizzy from that deathly aura alone and become unable to fight back. Retreat. Linley, after stabbing out with his rippling wind technique, immediately grabbed Olivier and flew backwards. Oliver's face was ashen. His soul wasn't as strong as Linley's, and the impact of that deathly aura on him was very great. Desri, in turn, was shocked. His attack had no effect at all. In the air above the great boat levee of the Yulon River, Linley, Desri, and Olivier stood shoulder to shoulder. They all felt that the situation was not good. "There's nothing I can do against him," Desri said mentally to Linley and Olivier. Linley didn't say anything. Desri was only skilled in soul attacks, but his foe was able to easily block it. Then what else could Desri do? Linley looked at Olivier, transmitting to him mentally, "Olivier, do you have any methods you can use to deal with this Beaumont?" Olivier narrowed his eyes, transmitting back, "I have a powerful attack, but after using it, my spiritual energy will be utterly consumed, and my soul will become weak as well. I won't be able to attack after that." Linley nodded secretly. "You still want to kill me?" Beaumont laughed wildly. "You there, soul-attacking fellow. Your soul attack isn't bad, but I, Beaumont, wasn't even afraid of the Grand Warlock. How could I be afraid of your soul attack? Your ability, compared to that of the Grand Warlock's, is far off." Linley thought back to the Grand Warlock's attack as well. If it hadn't been for his damaged sovereign artifact, and for that azure water drop, he truly wouldn't have been able to hold off against the Grand Warlock's final, desperate attack. "As for you, the one with the white and black hair," Beaumont felt that victory was assured. "You are able to simultaneously use light divine power and darkness divine power. This really is quite unique. But, a simple sword blow like that? If I, Beaumont, couldn't resist it, I would have died in the planar prison long ago. Just a simple sword? HRMPH. This sword is enough to kill you." Olivier ground out. He was prepared to go all out. "Ha!" Beaumont, utterly enraged, let out a laugh. "Fine. You want to die? I'll grant you death." The deathly aura around Beaumont's body once more began to grow in strength, and he charged like a boundless tidal wave towards Linley, Desri, and Olivier. Linley hardened his heart. "Kill." The fierce-faced Olivier was wielding his mystic Isis word, and he charged out in front of Linley. Linley, not hesitating at all, followed from straight behind. Both Linley and Olivier had decided to use their ultimate attacks. Haha, Beaumont laughed wildly, while at the same time he began to brandish that deep blue warblade. The deep blue warblade transformed into countless blade blurs, forming into a wave of blade shadows. At the same time, Beaumont's eyes turned scarlet red. And within the blue blade waves there appeared a faint red color. Although Linley had moved after Olivier did, Linley's speed was faster than Oliver's, and so he was the first to clash with Beaumont. I will kill that black-haired kid and badly injure this Linley. Beaumont was no longer going to hold back. But suddenly, Beaumont discovered to his astonishment that an extremely bewitching violet light suddenly flashed from Linley's body, while at the same time, a gentle, soft sound, almost like that of a flute, could be heard. This sound was very pleasant to listen to. In that moment, the entire world seemed to have turned quiet. The only sound that could be heard was that of the soft, gentle flute sound. Clang! The violet flash of light collided with that wave of blade blurs, but a blood-red illusory sword shadow actually shot out from blood violet, piercing directly into Beaumont's brain. Beaumont's soul was extremely powerful, and once he used his spiritual energy, he could form it into a powerful wall to block. Even in the face of the ultimate attack of the Grand Warlock, Beaumont was confident that he would at least survive. But that gentle flute sound had actually caused Beaumont to sink into a reverie for a moment, causing him to not control his spiritual energy to form it into a blockading wall. In that moment, Linley's attack descended. That was the moment the blood-red illusory sword shadow shot out. Only after the illusory sword shadow pierced into his sea of consciousness did Beaumont awake in shock. But it was too late. The blood-red illusory sword shadow pierced straight into Beaumont's divine spark. Beaumont's divine spark shuddered, and then that blood-red illusory sword exploded. The soul contained within that divine spark was shattered by the collision, and Beaumont's eyes instantly turned dull. His soul had been destroyed. Naturally, his wave of blade blurs stopped as well. Profound truths of velocity, hymn of the wind. Die. Linley was just a moment faster than Olivier, whose most powerful attack had also arrived. This was a battle between deities, and Olivier was just a fraction of a moment behind Linley. Just as Beaumont died, Oliver's sword arrived. The mystic Isis word, surrounded by a black-white color, suddenly formed a sort of translucent membrane around itself. Outside the membrane around the long sword, there were countless tears in space. This attack was definitely the most powerful attack Olivier was capable of after becoming a deity. Slash. The black-white sword light sent that blue warblade flying. The white-black sword light flashed through, effortlessly splitting Beaumont's entire body in half, from head to toes. Clearly, chopping Beaumont's divine body in half hadn't consumed much force, as that black-white sword light continued to chop downwards. Bang! Like an axe chopping into a tree, the black-white sword light chopped viciously against the pitch-black rock of the great Bois-Levé. Oliver's sword blow was simply too strong. His blow had actually, finally, caused this great Bois-Levé, which had been undamaged for over 10,000 years, to be chopped in half. That can't be. Oliver's spiritual energy was already utterly used up, but he still stared in surprise at Linley. When his attack intersected with Beaumont's, he was able to easily slice Beaumont in half. Only then did Olivier realize that Beaumont was already dead. Clearly, before he, Olivier, had attacked, Beaumont had already died. After all, he had spent almost no energy in chopping Beaumont in half. Linley, you killed him, Olivier said in surprise. I was just slightly faster than you. Linley waved his hand, snatching and storing the now flying divine spark, divine artifact, and interspatial rings. Desri flew over as well, his face covered in smiles. Linley, you too, but before he even finished the sentence. Bang! From below, the great boat-à-levis which Olivier had chopped into 2 pieces suddenly exploded, transforming into countless pieces of stone. The great boat-à-levis, which Olivier had only just barely able to break through with his full strength attack, had utterly exploded. Haha, after 10,000 years, I've finally returned. Yulon continent. It's been 10 million years. I, Locard Loca, have returned, haha. Yulon continent. I'm back. I'm back. I'm back. Like a horde of locusts, countless human figures charged out wildly from the great boat-à-levis, flying in every which way. Thanks, young fellows. A voice rang out in the minds of Linley, Desri, and Olivier. This scene had utterly terrified and stupefied the 3 of them. The auras of those countless experts had already utterly shocked Linley. Boom! A black-robed figure suddenly appeared in mid-air. Instantly, space froze. Lord Beirut. Linley instantly realized that the person in mid-air was Beirut. Beirut's face had changed dramatically. He stretched out his right hand, which transformed into an enormous black palm, slamming directly down towards the great boat-à-levis. The endless stream of people charging out from the great boat-à-levis like a flood were suddenly caught. Lord Beirut, Linley, Olivier, and Desri were utterly confused. Beirut's face was ashen as he stared at Linley, Olivier, and Desri. You have caused an utter catastrophe.